Gamers, these demons are on a mission to save the world, and we are along for the ride. Welcome back to Tales of Praxis. I'm your host, Aaron Suduko, the founder of With a Terrible Fate, your online volunteer publication home for every which way of analyzing the storytelling of your favorite medium, video games, whether it's long-form written content, convention lectures, such as the one we'll be giving in a few short weeks here at PAX West in Seattle, podcasts, streams such as this, or anything in between. Pottery, oh, you are coming for Grail. You took seriously the challenge to leave the first comment, and I guess not counting my own, you made it. So congratulations. Got to be careful, Pottery. It's King of the Hill, so you got to be able to come back and defend the title on Wednesday too. That's the trick to keep people coming back. See, I'm slowly learning how to do Twitch. For those of you who are not as familiar with the series as our dear friend Pottery, Tales of Praxis is a streaming series and analytical article series that I started for With a Terrible Fate a few months ago, just studying and analyzing the storytelling of Bandai Namco's Tales series of JRPGs, looking at them all eventually in conjunction with one another to situate them in conversation, understand their storytelling language as a whole, how they play off of each other, and also what they've contributed to video games as a storytelling medium more broadly. We've had a great romp so far, I think it's fair to say, on the stream, with everything from Symphonia to Dawn of the New World to Zestiria to Zestiria's DLC, now into the thick of Berseria. I've also looked at Tales of the Abyss, Tales of Destiny off stream. Just finished up my replay of Tales of Arise so that I can competently lecture about it in a couple of weeks. So that should be fun. And I'm now cautiously turning my attention to Tales of Fantasia because I don't want to absorb too many of the Tales games before I've put out more analysis about them, because it's a lot to keep in one's head, even when one is doing it on a semi-professional basis. But I also want to be able to sit down and enjoy and absorb Fantasia while the other games in that kind of thematically timeline-bound suite of games, Symphonia and Dawn of the New World, are relatively fresh in my head. But for now, we are working through Tales of Berseria and excited to do that with you and hopefully share some new analyses around the corner as well. I'm working on that piece I've been talking about, putting Vesperia in dialogue with Tales of Destiny, which I think is going to be a tremendous amount of fun. So fingers crossed. My goal with that one is to get it out before we're off to PAX West to lecture by Labor Day weekend. So hopefully you can expect it this month, but I will keep you posted. I know. Well, Pottery, that was my experience too. God bless Nintendo for their hardware survivability, because I dusted off my old Game Boy Advance SP, which must be at least 2 decades old at this point, and it works as if it were new, and I just bought it from Toys R Us, and I'm sitting down to play it through again. I found a save file, my first save file, which had over 90 hours in it, unsurprisingly, so I spent a lot of time with it. I remember the broad strokes of it, but especially now that I'm way deeper into the series in basically every possible way, already it's been fun to play through it with new eyes. I've probably only put in 45 minutes, but everything from the inciting incident onwards, from the first time you see the Great Tree onwards, it's wonderful to see it with the fresh context of Symphonia in my head. I know, I'm still waiting for them to make a better system than the SP, but I don't know if it can happen. I feel like that really was the apex of those old school formative console generations, in my view, at least. As I'm working through my analysis on Vesperia, I wanted to kick off the stream by sharing something that was a little bit lighter that I discovered as I was going through my gaming collection and just thinking about Vesperia. And I think it'll set the tone for a lot of the things we've been talking about anyways on the stream as of late. So as I've mentioned on the stream, for Tales of Praxis, I played through Vesperia's Definitive Edition, which only came out a handful of years ago. It was my first time playing that through. I played the original version of Vesperia for my Xbox 360 back a long, long time ago, probably at least 10 years at this point. But as I've been thinking more about, trying to wrap my head around what the game is trying to say and the way it works relative to the other Tales games, I figured, oh, I'll dig out my original physical copy, take a look at that. And it was really interesting just for me to look at the box itself in terms of how the game was marketed. Because I've talked on the stream before, Vesperia was one that I had a really hard time getting into when I first played it. I kind of wrote it off. I grumbled and shook my fist at the sky for a long time because I knew that a lot of people had a lot of love for it, Pottery, you included, as we've talked about. But I feel like back then, my sense was that either I didn't get what those people were trying to say, or those people didn't get what made a good game. I was very frustrated about it. So I was trying to put myself back in that old mindset and ask myself, well, why was that the case? Why would I have had such a negative reaction to it when I was younger? And one thing that was interesting that I noticed, I don't know if that was the reason. Yeah, and fair point, Pottery, and I appreciate you calling that out. Here's another thing that's interesting, food for thought, though. Like, I was just looking at the box, right? And I imagine this is probably even hard to find these days, but if you look at the original box, and I push it up to my webcam just like that, it's a focused shot of just Yuri and Flynn. And that's the entirety of the cover art, which is very unusual for Tales games, especially like even thinking about those older games of that generation. Like, look at Tales of Symphonia. You don't have the whole party, but you have Lloyd and Colette and Zelos and Sheena. So a large representation and cross-section of a bunch of the different things you're going to see in the game with the summon spirits in the background. And then look at Tales of the Abyss, too, the OG one for PlayStation 2. You've got the entire party on the cover there. And of course, Luke is foregrounded and he's taking on the action. And true to that, he's the star of the game in many ways, as we've been talking about. But how interesting, isn't it, to see the contrast between that and the way Tales of Vesperia was built, where, again, with this being the original version as opposed to the definitive edition, there's really just one proper party member on the cover with the kind of yin to his yang, or vice versa. It's hard for me to keep those concepts straight. But none of the other party members, right? Oh, yeah, and Pottery, I'm sure we'll have much more to say about the relationship between Yuri and Flynn, so that's a good point. I won't belabor the point here, but just to belabor it a little bit. So I was reading the back, and this is interesting. This is like if you're picking up this game, and it's back in the day, put yourself in this mindset, you're at a Toys R Us, or I think they had GameStops back then, but one of those physical locations, you just pick this up, maybe you don't even know that much about the Tales series, and you see the cover, and then you look on the back to see, okay, what's this game about? The description, the entirety of the description is a fantastic tale ready to be told. A power struggle begins in a civilization dependent on an ancient technology, the Blastia, and the empire that controls it. The fate of two friends traveling separate paths intertwines in an epic adventure of justice, trust, and friendship. So in all of like 2.5 sentences, one of the full sentences is describing this game's story as the fates of two friends, that is Yuri and Flynn, intertwining across this journey. And I thought about that, and I thought about it in the context of my experience with the definitive edition, and even just all of the yarns we've been spending over the last few streams about our many different journeys through Vesperia and the different characters we saw and talked about. And I just found myself saying, man, what an unexpected, and I would say almost misleading way to describe Vesperia. Because if you see the front of the box with Yuri and Flynn, and you read that back, and you go into it expecting that kind of story, it's no wonder you're going to feel out to sea. Because that is not how I feel the game is presenting itself, or what it's trying to talk about really at all. That's certainly in there, but I would not say that is the substance of the game. And so I found myself thinking, like, how interesting that was the way in which it was presented. I don't know whether it's something subversive where the storytellers were thinking about bringing you in with one mindset and then giving you a bait and switch. Maybe that's something worth thinking about. Maybe, something that's equally plausible is, it was relegated to the job of a marketing department that maybe didn't have the best beat on the story. As I learn more about how the industry works, that wouldn't surprise me. But it goes to show, as much as anything else, how much our first impression of these stories and these games can color the way in which we see them. And I think that, as much as anything, like we were just talking about with regard to Fantasia pottery, can really speak in favor of going back once time has passed and once you've played other things and once you have enough critical distance to really just revisit it and see it for what it is as an art object and what it's trying to say. I think really giving myself that time and those other experiences along the way before I came back to Vesperia was a huge part of why I'm now, seeing and appreciating a huge dimension of other aspects to it. So food for thought. Yeah, and pottery, I mean, I won't claim that I invented that idea. I very much drew that idea of yin and yang from the cover art, so I wouldn't be surprised if that's what they were going for. Again, like a compelling symbol and way of encapsulating Yuri and Flynn's story and relationship with one another, but to say that that is the story of Vesperia, like, oh man, I just hope that a lot of people, if they bought into it for that reason and were turned away from it as I was, take the time to go back and reconsider it, because it is such a special game with so much other magic in it. Oh, wow. So they're even still hammering that home on the definitive edition on Steam, that description. Boy, well, yeah, worth maybe leaving a comment on Steam or something at the very least. Like, hey, just so you know, if this doesn't sound like your cup of tea, maybe this is a reason why it is after all, and vice versa. Maybe if this is what you're looking for, open your mind to reconsider before you take the plunge and experience it. Yeah, it might be worth calling out, at least as maybe like an Easter egg in the analysis once I publish the piece that I'm writing, because it's a little marketing tidbit, but interesting food for thought, I think, the more we get into this stuff. Like I said, I did finish Tales of Arise over the weekend, as I had expected. I'm deep in the scaffolding and design of the lecture I'm going to be giving with Dan at this point, so I don't want to give away the farm. I also don't want to forecast too many things when I haven't finished my thoughts on it. I'll just say all of the conversation we're having now as pertains to the value of Tales of Praxis and seeing these games in conversation with one another, that really came out for me in this playthrough of Arise in particular, because I'd played Arise before, and I really loved it the first time, but especially going back to it now after I've played a lot of the other games super recently, I finished it and I rolled credits, and one of the first things that I messaged to Dan, because we're talking about it in real time to get ready for the lecture, I said to him, man, this game is so great, but I definitely think it's one of those games where if you haven't played the other Tales games that it's interweaving into its story, you miss a lot of it, or you maybe don't know how to make sense of all of the pieces together with one another. Because we talked about when I was first starting out the playthrough, there's definitely a lot of Symphonia in it, in a lot of ways, from the characterization of the main party to the kind of struggle between worlds and a lot of other things to boot. But that's not all there is in it, and I think especially as the story moves on from its initial act into even the second act, but especially the third act, I feel like there's a lot there that is just not present in Symphonia and might even be considered subversive with respect to Symphonia because it's so different than what you expect from Symphonia. And if you don't have that grounding, I think it can be really hard to make sense of it. For instance, and I don't know that I have a really good insight yet that's attached to this observation, but it's the kind of thing that has had me mulling this. In Symphonia, the rules of the game are the way they are in a lot of JRPGs and a lot of Tales games, where you find out why the world is the way it is. It's someone's fault. And so in order to fix the world, you basically have to correct the actions of that person. And in Tales of Symphonia, that person, that half-elf, is Mythos, right? Tales of Arise is very different because it sets up the party to do a lot of similar things to what's going on in Symphonia, overcoming discrimination, figuring out how to break down different walls and then cope with the aftermath, and then figure out what the right thing to do is, even if they were trying to do the right thing but missed the mark the time before. A lot of things we talked to death during the Tales of Symphonia stream. But then when push comes to shove, there's this idea that, yeah, the world isn't quite the way it should be, but it's not really anyone's fault. And without going into too many spoilers with Tales of Arise, the conception basically being there are two worlds in the game, there's a lot of conflict in between the worlds, but at the end of the day, the ultimate explanation you get isn't that someone made it that way with some goal and they had the wrong thing in mind. It's just that the worlds were supposed to be something other than what they ended up being, and so the party has to fix that. I think if you have the Tales of Symphonia model in mind of a particular character representing that which needs to be overcome at the end of the day, it's very easy to feel sort of adrift or out to sea or dissatisfied with that, like they kind of left the game half finished. I don't feel like that's fair because it doesn't read to me as a half finished game or something with a rushed third act or anything like that. But I think what's given me a different perspective on it this time, and what I'm thinking about as I sit down to work on this lecture, is okay, with the understanding that a lot of this game comes from Symphonia, what does it borrow from some of the other Tales games? Like, I don't know, something like Tales of the Abyss, where there's this notion of these various primordial forces that permeate the world and that can coalesce into these expressions of consciousness and will, even if, and especially if, they're not tied to a particular person. And what can we learn from Tales of the Abyss about how to adjudicate very similar forces that come up in Tales of Arise? Or, since Vesperia is on our mind and we have a collective earworm about it, what about something like the Ediphagos, this similarly diffuse entity, force, whatever you want to call it, that's kind of beyond human comprehension, but also, importantly, I think, a consequence and constituent of the natural world as it was originally designed or happened to be created, or whatever verbiage you want to use around it. So there are other games that I think not only give us insight into how to wrap our heads around Tales of Arise, but also are pretty directly and I would say consciously channeled by Arise. So I think those are a lot of the connections that are getting more interesting to me as I'm getting further into Tales of Praxis. Hopefully it's also going to be the kind of stuff that gets much more multidimensionally interesting and fun to dig into as a group as we get into more of these games, stream more of them, talk about more of my publications on them, everything in between. So good times ahead. Had a great time with Arise. It's always a great time, but then all of the Tales games are pretty much a great time. I will remind everyone who's tuning in, it's still anyone's guess as to what we will stream after Berseria. There's been some fun discussion and somewhat of group mindshare around Graces, but we still have a lot of game to go and a lot of time to think about it, so that is an open agenda item to be sure. I do want to get back in, and I'm excited. It occurred to me, like, we spent a lot of time during the last stream vamping about other games, which is fantastic, and that's one of the things that I really love. I do think, especially now that we're getting into stuff like the exegesis and interpretation of like the lore of Innominat, we're probably going to start getting a lot more like key narrative insights that are going to be important for us to sort of figure out how to weigh and situate within the broader story of Tales of Berseria. I think the fact that it can be hard to do that is oftentimes why it's easy to let second acts kind of slip by, even though that's where a lot of the meat of the journey and figuring things out happens. So I definitely want to give us the space and the focus to do that as we go forward in the second act, and maybe pay a little more self-conscious attention to that. I thought that one thing that would be good to just remind us as we dive back in here, because we did get like a key piece of lore and explanation for the nature of the world, albeit one that was, like we talked about, very directly esoteric in nature. So I went back and I copied the entire like verse of the song that we got from the storybook that Laphicet and Grimoire have started deciphering, I think was their term, together, just so we could have that in our heads as we go on. And we talked a little bit about the language last time, so I got the exact language. Pottery, it was what you and I were thinking, the language that is subversive and the opposite of what you would expect from Zestiria. So we were right on the money there. But the whole verse goes, 8-headed is the Lord of the land, with 7 mouths to devour malevolence. Through pulses of earth doth base nature's flow, as he awaits the time of awakening. 4 Empyreans may tear him asunder, but so long as there is one receptive to divine power, Therions shall forever be reborn, in the sight of the full crimson moon. The nameless Empyrean hath one heart, the nameless Empyrean hath one body. So, of course, like any esoteric verse, there are a million ways to go with interpreting that, thinking about how it's going to fit into the story. I imagine a lot of the second act will be struggling with understanding that and coming to live the understanding of it, like we get in a lot of other sort of esoteric texts and stories with esoteric themes, like I talk about in my work on Tales of the Abyss. But one thing, I think it was you, Pottery, who called out that's interesting to keep in mind. Lords of the Land, of course, a keyword, something that we understand from Tales of Zestiria. We also understand them as seraphim who have specified, circumscribed domains of influence in the world, and of whom there are many. In this verse, on the other hand, which we now understand to be the deep history of the world, there is one Lord of the Land, something with 8 heads, 7 mouths to devour malevolence, seems to be tied with a Nominat. So already something that harkens forward, not harkens back to Tales of Zestiria, but with sort of a very different, more primordial, you might say, connotation. We got some fun crossovers too in terms of Eleanor saying, yeah, I have no idea what malevolence is. Doesn't seem like anyone in this time does, but now we know it's something that was from the deep past of the world, and that eventually, by the time passes and we get into Zestiria, that language has been reclaimed. How that happens, time will tell. We will find out. One thing that's interesting to keep in mind too, in keeping with a lot of what we've been discussing in terms of the the sequence according to which things are discovered in stories like a Tales JRPG, is the fact that we might be losing the forest for the trees now and thinking, oh yeah, the party is uncovering the histories of the world and they understand what they need to do to save it. But I was sitting and I was thinking about this, and unless I missed something, and I don't think I have, even though they're now discovering a lot more about kind of the origins of the world, we still don't really know what Innominat is, besides the idea that he's a very strong Malik that the Abbey is calling an Empyrean, and whom Artorias tethered to him after he lost Ceres as a Malik, which isn't much to go on. We don't really have an idea even that Innominat is this intrinsically evil thing that needs to be stopped, or that his revival would necessarily be bad. We're still really just feeding off of the same directive that we got in Act 1, namely Velvet's revenge quest against Artorias. And we've seen a lot of evidence that the Abbey might not be the best for the world in terms of ruling with an iron fist and controlling all of the trade routes and being very authoritarian and totalitarian and maybe even fascist. But again, we have to remember the perspective through which we're seeing that, since we're following along with a group of demons and ne'er-do-wells and pirates and everyone in between, right? So even that might be somewhat suspect. So that's not to say that they're not at the end of the day doing the right thing. I think rather it's to say they're still, as we talked a little bit about last time in terms of the way different acts are set up, they're still following along that initial kind of directive and motivation of Velvet. They're just kind of, I think, trying to triangulate that with an understanding of the world in order to augment how they see their place in it and what it is that their quest actually amounts to at the end of the day as they go through the world, experience more, discover the stakes that couldn't have been clear to them at the outset of this. But importantly, that lack of clarity did not stop them from setting out on this journey. Quite the opposite. We are now on our way to Amenoch's temple in Palamides by the sea, which we understand to have been taken over by the Abbey because it seems like a great seat of spiritual power, also therefore a potentially great place for an Earth Pulse, and potentially therefore, as we are now inferring from that storybook verse, a great place in which to sequester a Therion for the purposes of reviving a Nominat. So we're going off of Lafisette's compass and Lafisette's decryption skills. Hopefully they're up to snuff, and hopefully we will find a Therion there on our journey. And Pottery, I will catch up with your last message, and then we will sink our teeth in and dig in here. Oh, cheers, Pottery. Well, I'm so glad that you are caught up. And yes, by all means, I think, as you're familiar with me saying by now, I think it really is fun to treat our real-life JRPG party stream adventure as a kind of book club. So I think, especially if we're trying to focus on making sure we don't miss anything going forward in the stream, feel free to mention any of your thoughts, especially those that pertain to Berseria or stuff that you want to chat or dig into a little bit more whenever. I trust your timing. I think, my gut says probably, honestly, in areas where we are now, where we're just navigating and working to the next piece of the story and beating up enemies and stuff, is a great time to catch up with those pieces of conversation. But yeah, shoot over whatever you're thinking whenever, and we can chat about them. Yeah, that was, I was actually thinking it would be a bit of a shorter preamble. It was not, but I think it was a preamble that was more directly grounded in Berseria than the last few have been. So cheers to that. And I think we're good to dig in. Oh, wow, okay. Look at you, good call. See, this is one of the things where, like, I haven't said this on stream, and I think this is just a shortcoming of me as opposed to the format, but I definitely have a bit of a hard time still, even after a few months of doing this, in terms of splitting my attention between like absorbing and working through the game and managing the stream and conversation. So I worry about little tidbits like that falling through the cracks as we navigate these things together. So yes, absolutely, be my eyes, call those things out, because I mean, talk about that being an important and valuable detail. Melchior's last name being Maven. Of course, people who, know Zestiria or went through the Zestiria stream with us know that there is a very important Maven, the immortal storyteller, in that as well. So that's definitely worth hanging on to as we get to know Melchior's character a bit more, and that unfolds throughout the game. But yeah, that's part of what honestly has been back in the mind as I've been weighing which games to play on stream versus on my own, is like, okay, which games do I really need 100% of Aaron's focus on, as opposed to games where I feel like I can more capably balance the conversation with digging into them in real time. Yeah, so that's interesting too. I mean, we don't have a good sense of timeline in terms of how much time passes between Berseria or Zestiria, or of course whatever events happen between now and then. So we do know that Maven was basically bound to be the storyteller and the chronicler forever. It's an interesting question then whether the one we knew in Zestiria might be a descendant of Melchior, or maybe Melchior himself under a different guise or with a different perspective on things after a lot of time passed. It strikes me as the kind of thing on which it'll be fun to speculate as we get further into this before we get a proper answer one way or another. Oh, yeah, another really great observation, Pottery. I remember reading about the various sicknesses, the fever. I think that's in the same book where it talks about the demon blight. But yeah, good on you. I did not make the connection that is probably what Laphicet was suffering from, like Velvet's actual brother Laphicet at the start of the game.
Yeah, I don't think you're one of them.
Do you remember what else it said about that sickness? Because there was that one, and there was demon blight, and then there was like full body crystallization a la Final Fantasy 13, except I think it was specifically black crystals. Do you remember what the rest of the description was? I think they were all pretty vivid and detailed. Boy, it is definitely an adjustment again to get back to this combat system after Arises. It'll probably take a few battles to get back into that. Thank you for everyone's understanding. I keep hitting R1 expecting to do a normal attack, but nope, those don't exist in Berseria. Got it. Yeah, we'll have to look it up. I feel like there was like... I forget what detail I'm thinking of, if it was the name of the sickness that they gave, or like some other little commentary about it, because I feel like there was something that gave it a little more thematic weight, which might be interesting for us to keep in mind as we continue on with Velvet's journey and thinking about the meaning of Laphicet. Isn't that interesting? I mean, we've talked a lot about the way in which these various games and stories have the characters electing to turn various objects and people into symbols, but I think there's something particularly interesting and I don't know if sad is the right word, but just noteworthy about this kid whose life is cut short too soon in more than one way, and who kind of lives and exists as a force in the story, but only as a symbol that's being navigated by like Velvet in terms of her loss, and also Laphicet the Malik as he kind of tries to formulate his own identity. I think there are some unique dimensions to that challenge. You're like a little student going for the gold star, Pottery, with all your notes. I love it. I remember, so I was fortunate enough for my first work, like studying video games, to be in high school, and I just remember as a high schooler especially being so giddy that for literal homework, for the work that I was doing for class, I was able to sit down and play video games and take notes on them the way that I would for a book in an English course. So I did. I had reams and reams of notes and journals about different scenes and moments in Nier and Majora's Mask and Dishonored and Deus Ex. Those were the 4 games that kicked things off back in the day. That's a good call, Pottery. I wonder whether there's like a subconscious difference that I felt between what was going on with Alphen and Velvet and what was going on with Colette that made me not bring it to mind, or if it was more of just a straight up oversight. Because she definitely loses sensation. I mean, she loses everything eventually. The ability to talk, the ability to human, the ability to soul. You know what maybe part of it is, and this is me thinking about it for all of 2 seconds, but I think probably part of what made the difference in my head, at least, and we can debate whether it's a distinction that's meaningful or not, I'm not sure whether it is, but the fact that in the case of Velvet and Alphen, both of these kind of have the conditions that lead to their lack of sensation forced upon them by these flash external factors. In Velvet's case, the ritual of the Advent with Artorias, and in Alphen's case, everything that led to him having the Iron Mask put on him. I don't want to go into spoilers for people who haven't played Arise. Whereas with Colette, like, yes, it's happening to her because of external reasons, but it's also a byproduct of this journey that she elects to go on. And I think even though she is, in an important sense, being used by Crucius for that journey, I think, not that I'm an expert in Colette's character, but I've always read her as, it being really important to the essence of what she cares about. Now she sees herself in the world, that she consciously chooses to go on that journey. In large part, I think I'm reading into the commentary she has with Lloyd the first time they get to the Tower of Salvation, where even after she loses her voice, she says to him, like, hey, it's okay. I kind of got the sense that Remiel was lying to me and he wasn't my dad and this wasn't what it was supposed to be, but I still felt like it could help people, and so I decided that it was worth doing even though I was being misled. I feel like that's something that's very quietly heartwarming and kind of empowering in terms of Colette as an agent who's able to claim her own destiny, even in a world where people are lying to her that she doesn't really fully understand. And I think the trials she goes through as a result of that therefore read to me as slightly different than what it is that Velvet and Alphen go through. Yeah, that's also true, Pottery. There's much more of a storyline to Colette's disease than what we get with Velvet and Alphen. I think I maybe also code Colette's as different because she has 2 things happen to her, right? There's the angel toxicosis, which is basically just the result of the process of preparing her body to be a vessel for Martel. And then there's her actual chronic and jealous infosium or whatever it's called, the actual sickness that Martel also had, which she has to deal with later on in the story. So maybe part of it is that I also think of like that second arc of Colette's sickness as the thing that is more of Colette's sickness in my head than what she goes through for the journey of regeneration. Yeah, I think that's another great way of putting it, Pottery.
Even a short weapon is effective up close.
Colette kind of sees hers as, you might even say, like an aspect or a symbol or artifact of her duty, whereas for Velvet and Elfin, they're just these kind of inexplicable burdens that they have to learn to live with and integrate into part of their character. I think they do seem interestingly linked. I think what I would say about it at this moment is, you know, we've talked a lot as we've compared the games across the course of the stream about like anti-parallel concepts, which is to say things that are deeply similar, but kind of where the relevant order or directionality of it is reversed for each of them. So that's very abstract, but this is a very concrete example of it, I think, which is why I bring it up. The idea that for Colette, the idea of like becoming an angel and getting sick is like she's saying the important thing is to become an angel, and like because of that decision that she's made in her character, she'll endure whatever it takes, including whatever like physiological symptoms impact her body as a result of that. Whereas with Velvet, it's almost the opposite sense of directionality, right? Where she wakes up as a demon and she has no sense of taste, and she kind of just like decides, I think you might argue as much as anything, as a way to cope with that new reality that's forced upon her, that she's just going to like lean into the identity of being this demon with like no humanity, so that it's all the easier for her to survive on her like sole purpose of revenge for Artorias. So it would be almost like if Colette found herself losing bodily sensation and then like created this whole narrative of having to go on a journey of world regeneration, because that's the only way for her to like make sense of her self-concept and feel comfortable given the constraints on her character and body.
In the direction of the temple. The feeling's getting stronger now.
That is absolutely interesting. And I think, you know, something that's been raised in this second act is also the deeply related question of what might she not be willing to give up that she thought she'd be able to give up. Because throughout the beginning of the game, she was very insistent, I'll do whatever it takes to get revenge on Artorias, and anything and everything and everyone is just a tool for that revenge. Now it seems like in spite of herself, she's actually become invested in and cares about things other than that revenge, such as, I don't know, this little Malik who bears the name of her brother and whom she's kind of imprinted on, right? So it seems like right now part of what's kind of upending her character is this idea that she might not be actually as willing to sacrifice literally anything in her life as she initially comforted herself by saying that she would be. Yeah, I think that'll be a really interesting through line for us to keep track of. It's interesting. I mean, this is totally just free association ping pong, but it'll be fun to keep track of the idea of how the Tales series deals with different ideas of revenge too. For instance, and namely, I had completely forgotten that Tales of Fantasia was framed first and foremost as a revenge quest, where like in the first few moments of the game, poor Cress's village is destroyed. And like he doesn't know why, and of course he's set off on this big adventure where he's going to discover the nature of the world and yada yada yada. But his direct motivation with Chester for going on this journey is, yeah, we're going to get revenge for the destruction of our village, which was really interesting for me to stumble upon while I'm playing through this, in some ways very different, in some ways maybe not, revenge quest that's unfolding. Probably close to like 2 decades later in the Tales series history. I don't think I've said this already on this stream. I am still invested in trying out and getting to know every character in combat, but I've just made my peace with the idea that going back to Velvet for the duration of this area is a good choice and a nice palate cleanser for me. I was having some trouble with Magilu. Yeah, that's an interesting question, Pottery. Do you have any top of mind things in terms of like different moments for revenge that people walk away from? Might help if we had some concrete examples to think about. All right, here we are, Palamides. We might want to put a pin in our conversation for a sec, depending on what happens next. Yeah, for sure, Pottery. I think it's something worth talking more and thinking more about. Top of the mind for me right now is, I think, like we've talked about in Vesperia already, I think a lot of what makes its story challenging and interesting is the idea that its characters are all really on their own journeys, and that's kind of the point, and the journeys don't reduce to one single unified reason for going on this particular quest together. Like everyone's kind of always there for their own reasons, and like their arcs aren't even really necessarily resolved at the end of it. They've kind of just decided what they want to do next. And I think one thing that you see coming up over and over again in so many of the Tales games is this idea, really a version of the idea that I talk about in my recent publication on Regal, that it's not right to just ignore the past and do whatever you want in the future, but it's also important not to be chained to the past and define yourself by it. End of the revenge, like we talked about in terms of that skit in Tales of Symphonia, right? And I think there's something similar with the idea that if you live in a world and a story where the rules are that everyone has to figure out their own shit to do all the time, and even if you're spending your time doing stuff with other people, there's kind of an inescapable particularism to it where all you have are your ideas and thoughts and feelings and whatever your goals are. And even if they happen to align with someone else, that's purely coincidence, and kind of recognizing that radical individualism is the only way to sort of be happy and make your peace with the world. That's at least one thing you can take out of Vesperia. I don't think it's the only thing, and I don't know if it's what I take out at the end of the day, but it's what I've been thinking about. But suffice to say, if you have that perspective and that's what you learn about your place in the world, I think it's very hard to like rationally accept that way of living and also hold on to the idea of revenge. Because if everyone's just figuring out their own path, and sometimes it comes together for better and sometimes worse, that doesn't mean you have to let things go, but it also means it's kind of deeply myopic and misguided to define your entire future trajectory in the world according to what someone else did at one moment in their own path through the world. This is maybe too much philosophy for a Monday evening. Well, it's not Friday evening. No, Monday evening is actually the perfect time for this. So the philosopher Leibniz, whose work features in such famous blockbuster works of philosophy such as Xenoblade Chronicles, the first, he had this really interesting idea of metaphysics, which is basically like the foundational stuff according to which the world is comprised and according to which it evolves in time, where he basically said, God creates all the things that there are going to be, and he sets everything in motion, and there's no real interaction between any of those simple constituents in the universe. God just sends them all on the paths that he wants them to and that are going to be the best things possible for them. And to different people and objects that are embedded within the world, like humans, it can seem as if we're having causal influence on one another, you know, telling someone to do something or pushing a ball down a hill or something like that. But it's all just what Leibniz referred to as pre-established harmony. This idea that guided by God, everything moves in concert in such a way that it appears as though there's interaction. There's really not. Everything's just doing its own thing by the will of God. And I feel like something similar, but maybe on a more like human-oriented and existentialist lens, could be read into Vesperia, which for me would open a path to looking into some of what I see as its core themes nowadays, and also why it thinks the way it does about revenge. So, long answer to a short question, but that might be one way to think about it. Actually, man, I'll tell you, and again, we don't need to make this whole thing a Vesperia stream, because, well, then we won't have anything to talk about if and when we actually stream Vesperia. But, and I'll try not to spoil Vesperia too much, but I mean, we have to talk about this for a second since you mentioned Zagi. Like, talk about a character I turned around on so much, because they hammer home so many times in the early game. Boy, this dude is nuts. Don't know what to do with him. He won't stop showing up. But then, like, yeah, maybe he's obsessed with revenge. But I think the thing that was really sad and touching to me about Zagi in an unexpected way was like, I really felt like they hit the nail on the head in terms of what they were trying to do with him the last time you interact with him. And it really did come across to me just like he finally found someone who could play with him and in whose eyes he felt like actually seen, whereas he hadn't been recognized by anyone before. And so I think you could even tie it into what I was just talking about in terms of like the really sad paradox of like the human need to like chart your own course in the world, but also be recognized by others. I think a big part of how Vesperia adjudicates issues like revenge and collaboration and party dynamics boils down to that tension. And I think Zagi is like, at the end of the day, a really kind of touching and sad portrait of it. There you go, Joker to Yuri's Batman. Succinctly and poetically put.
What's this?
A demon! The demon we heard about? Sounds like it's having fun.
Then we'll use this distraction.
Wanted to just make a note of the great chat we were having because I didn't want to lose track of it when I sat down to continue writing about Vesperia. Pizzicato, hey, welcome back. Are you talking about like Leibniz or just in terms of like philosophical thinking in general? And Leibniz, it's been a while since I've done my hardcore Leibniz. I think it's that, strictly speaking, in terms of what we typically think of as free will, in terms of like deciding our actions in a radical way where we could do otherwise, there's not really such thing because everything moves in this pre-established harmony that I was talking about. But then I think there are kind of more concessionary conceptions of free will, according to which, like, if you think of yourself as this mind and soul that is moving like in accordance with the will of God and what he's guiding for the cosmos, I think there are like at least some Leibniz scholars who think you can kind of claw back a lot of what you would want from a concept of free will, where like the human mind is like actively participating in advancing the pre-established harmony that brings about the best of all possible worlds. Leibniz, yes. Gottlob Leibniz? I think Gottlob was his first name. Or Gottfried. Now it's going to bother me. Gottfried, yes. I was confusing him with Gottlob Frege, I believe, another philosopher. Yes. That early modern mad lad. Great thinker. And truly, like, I mean, we can do an esoteric reading of Vesperia around Leibniz, and now that we're talking about it, I probably more likely than not will. But if you want a game that is like a really thoughtful and cool story that is very directly drawing on a ton of Leibniz's philosophy, Xenoblade Chronicles. It's a great game. You don't have to know Leibniz to appreciate the hell out of it, but it doesn't hurt. No, I remember you saying that with Wittgenstein, Pizzicato. The good thing is, with German pronunciation, almost always the rule is just, it sounds exactly like it looks on paper. The harder part is just, especially if you're used to speaking a language like English, you have to kind of retrain your brain in terms of like what the phonemes are actually supposed to sound like versus the weird ways in which English corrupts them. Well, yeah, and that little thing. So not 100% of the time, as Pottery notes, but once you get past that exception, it's all pretty much phonetic. Oh my goodness, Pizzicato, yeah.
Your style is really unique.
Is that your situation? Because if that is, I do not envy you that one bit, my friend. I barely get by with English, and it's my first language, so I can't fathom having to navigate more than one.
Wow, look outside. It's the ocean.
This was a place of worship for Amenoch, the water Empyrean. The ancients built this sanctuary underwater for the same reason that Eumasia's temples were built underground.
But building this underwater couldn't have been easy.
Aye. With the Earth temples, all they had to do was keep digging. Here, they had water to contend with.
How did they do it? You can't split the sea like you can a log.
They started by stacking giant stone blocks in the shallows, creating an enclosed space. Then they drained the water and expanded the enclosure.
I can imagine, Pizzicato. Yeah, must give you a pretty different perspective on some of these names, huh? And grammar, probably, right?
It's mind-boggling, isn't it?
The humans believed that by going through such great hardships to build these temples, they could show the depth of their devotion.
That's what a lot of people thought when they built the cathedrals back in medieval times, in the real world.
Sat on the seacoast.
What? Are you saying
It was a
I'm wrong?
religious act itself.
No, I'm only reporting what I've read in academic journals.
How would coastal ruins sink into the ocean?
When the Empyreans began their slumber, the land shifted, and this temple was swallowed by the sea. Scholars were able to prove that the sand and the heavy stones formed an airtight seal around the structure. Later, people carved an undersea tunnel to connect to the temple, bringing it to its current state. Now that you mention it, I think I read that book too. Revised Theories on Ancient Architecture, right? That's the one. Have you read
Oh,
it?
they're academic nerds together.
I only read the first edition.
The problem with the stone enclosure theory is that each time you expand the enclosure, the innermost stones have to be carried out. Once that was pointed out as being too inefficient, alternate theories were developed. The revised edition has a number of competing theories. I highly recommend reading it.
I will then.
So, wait, was that a complete rebuttal of Eisen's explanation?
That was not my intention.
Oops.
It's okay. Archaeology is a continuous process of asking new questions and making new discoveries. Prevailing theories change all the time.
What's it matter anyway?
Hard as a rock on
Let's
the
get going.
outside and crying himself to sleep on the inside. I know that feeling. Pottery, another great question. I think the answer so far in Berseria, unless I've missed something, is no. And you just watched the VODs, so I imagine that if there were something, you would have caught it. So no, I think we have obviously all of the context from Zestiria in terms of recognizing dragons as the apex of Hellenization, and there were a few throwaway references to the 7 or 8 primordial dragons who wreaked havoc on the world in ancient times, which I think I called out last time as an interesting echo of the verse in the book that we got. But I don't think they've really talked about dragons one whit in Berseria so far. So I think you're right. That's a good thing to keep track of as well.
There's no Empyrean here, right, Eisen?
If you're worried about it, why not flip that coin of his? Heads, no Empyrean. Tails, Empyrean Central.
But it always comes up tails.
Like I said before, these temples are nothing more than places of worship built by human hands. The current religion started when humans, fearful of natural forces, began to worship four gods they called the Empyreans. If you're concerned about whether or not one is sleeping in these ruins, just remember that their very existence is only legend.
Be that as it may, Enominat certainly exists.
Aye. But I've never heard a single story of anyone actually seeing an Empyrean. Enominat must be a special case then.
Must be.
I suppose so. If there were four more like him, and they were all trying to stop us, we'd be sunk.
I can't disagree.
Yeah, definitely interesting pottery. It's called, I need to remind myself, it's called Draconic Drive, right? Will you tell me? Yeah, Draconic Drive. Yeah, and it's dragon type. And he has dragon dive as like a boost on top of that. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm sitting here wondering whether we've had any other references to dragons, period, let alone an explanation for what they are, because it would be interesting if Eisen was kind of like a de novo conception of those ideas. Like he's kind of, through his actions, inventing the concept of the dragons, but I don't know if we have a basis for that. It does. What is clear, even based on the conversation they were having around the book last time, is that there are a lot of concepts and ideas and entities within the world that were there and no longer are and are now being excavated again. So it may well be that dragons are part and parcel of that, which would make sense to me just as an inference to best explanation so far, because remember last time we got Eleanor calling out that she has no idea what malevolence is. And since we understand dragons ontologically to be like the worst kind of hellion that emerges as malevolence accrues amongst humans and seraphim, it would make sense that if the people in this world have no knowledge of malevolence, so too would they not really understand what dragons are or what the meaning of that even really is. Oh, we have a monolith! Is it in the ancient tongue? I don't think it said that. All right, so we have more gate puzzles. Man, I was really looking forward to awesome combat tips after all of the monoliths in ancient tongue in Zestiria. But I guess if this one wasn't in ancient tongue, we shouldn't expect it to be talking about the same stuff. Boy, see, I love this because it's so oversized with the vaulted ceilings and so grandiose in a way that is really evocative of Zestiria, like we were talking about a few streams ago. But notice in that skit they had about the architecture, there's also like a clear explanation for why it would be the case within the world, which is a version of what we were saying throughout Zestiria, even though they didn't talk about it that much, namely the idea that this kind of larger-than-life architecture is itself an act of reverence to the gods, in this case the Empyrean Amenoch. Hey, Grail! Welcome back, my friend. Pottery beat you well to the punch this time around with the first comment after you put your flag in the ground saying, try to stop me, so you'll have to try to redeem yourself on Wednesday. That's okay, Grail. If there's one thing JRPGs are great for, it's redemption arcs, right?
Did you see my complete and utter victory? Did you?
Okay, so for the higher class Mystic Arts in Berseria, we want at least 4 blast gauges and a combo of 8 or higher. That seems relatively simple to keep in my head. I say that now, I'm sure I'll forget. Yeah, I think that's something really good to keep thinking about, Pottery, because we've been talking a lot about the points of comparison and contrast between the worlds, but I think it's absolutely right to notice that the world becomes much more closed off and kind of mystifying by the time we get to Zestiria, because Mikleo and Saray do talk as if they're really interested in learning more about the world and about these like mythical far-off lands that they've only ever heard of and never visited. So it's not like knowledge of the overall world has gone away. They still understand that, but it's also clear that travel either isn't possible or isn't as regularly undertaken as it is in the time of Berseria. So keeping in mind and trying to figure out what it is that makes the difference between now and then in terms of oceanic travel is really good to keep an eye on, I think. A mature and incisive point, Grail. The crown is meaningless if you don't take the time to share it every now and then. But you missed this at the top, so I will emphasize to you too. Even with that said, this is exactly and only King of the Hill, so if you don't come back to claim the crown, then it means nothing. And you have no redemption arc. There's no middle ground. Well, we just have to stop everything right now to witness that, don't we, Pottery? The little overhead stretch one we just saw? See, she's not going to give it to us because she knows we're waiting for it. Okay, we'll try again later. I did my best! Why can't we input the idle animation that we want to see? That is interesting, though. And I love that because, like, at the least, it's an interesting little further note of similarity between them. At the most, it's like a little wink and the nod that the designers and creators understand just as well as we do that that there's a lot of similarity between those two characters. But I don't think that was a big leap from us. I mean, a lot of skits have emphasized that too. I think another thing that's worth calling out, just synthesizing a few of your different a few of your different pots, Pottery, because that's what you offer. No, synthesizing a few of your different comments, and excuse me that I can't speak today. I guess it's been a long Monday. But thinking about what you were saying about Laphicet suffering from the 12-year illness, and then also everything about the Corsair's Scourge, and everything about the advent of Demon Blight, and the crystallization one, whose name we don't remember. Like, there are a lot of various kinds of inexplicable or only marginally understood diseases and illnesses that are riddling this world in a way that we didn't really see even in the age named the Age of Chaos in Tales of Zestiria. Like, of course, there were Hellions to contend with and a lot of Malevolence, but not really the same emphasis on pestilence. Although we did see how Malevolence could be interpreted as disease and sickness in it's going to elude me, the name of the town. It's like one of the first towns you visit. But the town that Alicia goes to try to deal with the sickness there, which is really just Malevolence. So to me, at least at first glance, it evokes like a kind of like a Dark Ages vibe. Like you think of, Middle Ages, a lot of disease, not a lot of understanding, a lot of depth, a lot of death. But I wonder if there are like deeper thematic insights we can get as we wrestle with the relationship between Berseria and Zestiria based on just the omnipresence of disease in this one and the diversity of diseases. Yeah, but importantly, one of them, Grail, right? And like I said, we see that even in terms of how Malevolence is seen in Zestiria as well. But I think to have that point of continuity and then like, oh, and by the way, there are at least 3 other diseases, so Demon Blight isn't even all that special, relatively speaking, I think really reconfigures the context for it, for me at least. Yeah, Pottery, you want to catch Grail up? What are the highlights? We spent some time talking about Vesperia cover art. We talked a little bit about Arise. We talked about trying to dive in and put in more effort to kind of closely reading Berseria as we get into the second act here so that we can track some of the ways in which things are evolving, which is sort of what we've been doing even in this dungeon with the stuff we're most recently talking about. We talked through great notes that Pottery put together based on watching the most recent VODs of Berseria, so there's a lot of good stuff in there in terms of like comparing and contrasting Velvet with Elfin and Colette, thinking through some of these diseases. Pottery caught that Melchior's last name, it was called out in a book in the capital, was Maven, which obviously has some valuable connotations for the Zestiria vets in the room. Maybe, Grail, but come on. We gotta try to stay generous. I think, as we've been talking about in the last few streams, we have reason to believe that might have been the case in something like Dawn of the New World, but as we were with Dawn of the New World, let's try to be generous to Berseria and see what it might be trying to say with the plurality of things. Oh, we got the big unlock. That's what I'm talking about. Is it another Therion? It looks like the place where you would store another Therion.
Got the security for us, but
Reminiscent of the first demons Velvet encountered back in her village.
Wolfie's got the crest of Amenoch, the same pendant worn by priestesses.
Then that makes this demon
A priestess.
Yeah, she must be the missing mother, Mahina.
She did a really bad job of being a priestess.
can't be.
don't just stand there. It's gonna eat you.
Yeah, the waterfall puzzle mechanics are perhaps not the most inspired, especially right after the very similar switching walls in the forest in the last area, Grail. I don't know if that's what you're talking about. I assume it is. Although I suppose those gate opening mechanics are most of the puzzle crawling that we've gotten in Berseria so far, as I think about it. Even back on Inominat's throne, like the whole mechanic there was figuring out ways to open the doors that were the big seals and sigils that were in place by either the Abbey or Inominat or Artorias. Not quite clear. Well, but as we've clearly established, that latter issue was your own fault, so That's a wall you have to figure out how to break down inside yourself. He said after having navigated many puzzles in Berseria and also experienced the full thematic arc of Arise for a second time. If there's a wall in your way, you break it down. Or climb over it. That's acceptable too sometimes.
Beloved by her village, would become a demon. Eleanor? She's never going to be the same again. This is the least I can do for her. So says reason. Huh? That feeling. Damn!
Let the demon be. We don't need it.
Yeah, just quickly, I told Pottery, Grail, it's something I'm definitely still thinking about because now I'm sitting down to put together this lecture for PAX West in earnest. My first impression of it is, and I talked about this at the top of the stream, so I won't go as much into it, but basically, I'm thinking now more, especially in the context of Tales of Praxis, after having played a lot of the other games very recently, that Arise is one that definitely benefits from having some of that background context, because I think it's very easy to take the first act and looking at a lot of the world and character design in the game and just think about it as sort of a recapitulation of Tales of Symphonia. But I think there's a lot of stuff going on in there that evokes other games in really interesting ways. And I think especially in the third act, you get a lot of tinges of things like, oh, what is it for a force or the nature of the world to itself become sentient in a way that is like on a different level than human sentience, which of course you have a model for in Tales of the Abyss, or even something like this kind of natural force beyond human ken that is a part of the way the universe was designed, but not something that ought to be allowed to remain the case, like the Autophagos in Vesperia. So I think I liked it. It made me feel like there was a path to understanding it in a slightly different way than I did the first time, that just requires a little bit more like intertextual thinking about what is the ways it is maybe doing things like, just for one example, subverting Tales of Symphonia maybe by introducing some of these elements from other games that run either against the grain or at least in a different direction than what a lot of Tales of Symphonia does, where Symphonia blames one person for the structure and the errors of the world because of their decision. In Tales of Arise, it's much more of like an inexplicable natural state that ought to be otherwise, even though it's being the way it is no one's fault. So I think it's a much more like, I guess, complicated arc than I remembered it, but it's got me interested to dig back into it and think about it a bit more. Yeah, I loved the cinematic quality too, that should be said. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that back up on your own, Grail, because I did actually want to ask you, like, where are you getting your impression of Volren that you think he's funny? Because you clearly think he's very funny. You've mentioned it basically every stream. And so I had myself thinking like, oh, well, maybe there's some scene or moment with him that I just don't remember that's really funny. But I think the only funny thing to me about it is how funny you find him when I don't find him to strike any funny notes with me. So where are you getting that from? Yeah, I think the cinematic quality applies to both of those fights, Pottery. Even the one at the end of Act 1, right? I mean, Volron kind of serves as the bookmark for all of the acts in a way that's cool. I hadn't really processed that my first time through it either. A disease that causes humans to become a living mass of black crystal. Yes, okay. But so what about the other one? What about the one you were saying probably applies to what Laphicet was suffering with? You found that? I'm sure you would have told us if you'd found it already. If you find it, let us know, because I'm still interested. Oh my god, I think part of why I can barely speak, just for context, I don't know if other people are having a heat wave, but here in Colorado, it's not even a heat wave, but it hit 100 today, and it's wild because I'm in my apartment, and I'm lucky enough to have it climate controlled, so it's like not a different temperature in here right now, but it's one of those days where the heat just kind of seeps into your very existence. So like if you see me chugging water even more than usual, that's why. And if you see me trying to string words together and having issues, I think it's even just from my short walks outside with my dog today. Aaron, no likey the heat. 12-year sickness, yes, okay. Dooming afflicted children to repeated fevers and... Oh, so that's why we couldn't remember more. That's really all there was. Maybe I was just hoping there would be more to it than that, because I really felt like there was a deeper context. But maybe I was conflating that with what it said about demon blight or something like that. Well, thank you for finding it, Pottery. Thank you.
Demon. I guess she caught demon blight when she was looking for her daughter.
Yeah, that's what the girl at the inn said.
But even after turning into a demon, she's still searching for her daughter. Well, Rokurok, Korogane, and Dial all remember what they wanted when they were human, right? Demon or not, she's a mother. It's no surprise she...
Oh, well, for all we've been talking about it, we'll definitely have to try to find that side quest, Grail.
Or it could be something else.
If you remember, like, where it is or when it happens, so we can keep an eye out for it, that would be super helpful.
She felt as a human, but demons don't have a sense of motherhood or any such thing. You saw how violent she was. She's not Mahina anymore. When she became a demon, she lost...
Weird thing to say, demons don't have a sense of motherhood, though, when you've been traveling with Velvet, who very clearly, for all else you want to say about her, has a sense of motherhood.
One demon left...
Oh, well, okay, take my lines, Luffy said.
And this one's even willing to attack exorcists. Demons can wipe out entire villages, even cities, just as they destroyed my village. Thus, my path is clear.
Eleanor is right. There's no turning back once you've changed. Perhaps it would be a mercy to grant her peace through death.
I'm going to really quickly catch up on messages because, my goodness, we're being overwhelmed in a delightful way. Pizzicato, great question. We've talked about this a little bit before. The very short answer is I've thought about doing a Discord server for With a Terrible Fate before. We've put together a few gestures at one, and we do have one that's used internally by the analysts for kind of talking about different projects and stuff like that. But I think especially now that we're thankfully getting a little bit of critical mass in the real life JRPG party for Tales of Praxis, it would be fun to try to put a little bit more time into ginning that up in a way that it could be more of a public facing forum or community in the spirit of everything we do on the site. So let me put that on my list to look into and try to make happen. I'm a little bit of a Discord novice. That's what's held us back in the past. But especially as we're getting ready to go off to PAX West, I think it would be really fun to get that off the ground. So thank you for calling that out. I think I've also just been anxious that I would put it together and then no one would use it. But especially if we can use it as an extension of the stream, I think that's a great opportunity to do it. I will, absolutely. Well, if and when I do, and I think it's more of a when than an if at this point, I will announce it on the stream. So yeah, stay tuned, please. Oh yeah, Pottery, please let me know what your other thought on my Symphonia piece was. I have such joy putting these together and working through them and sharing them with the world, and then I feel like I never talk through them with people as much as I would like to. So the more you want to talk about it, the more I'm game for that. Grail, yeah, I was wondering whether you would go with Volron, the fact that like his character design kind of looks a little like a newer age Disney character, because I noticed that, and that wasn't enough for me to say, oh, he's funny. But again, since I had in my head that you thought he was really funny, I thought maybe that was a bit of his character design that was bleeding through to you. I will point out, as someone who literally just played this scene like 3 days ago, when he says you think this petty device can contain me, he does immediately basically just step out of it. So as if to show that he's really just been sort of chained there, but hanging out there in accordance with his will or whatever he's like willing to accommodate that's imposed upon him. So I think it's interesting because we've talked about this a little over the last few streams in terms of characters that are characterized by virtue of being more of gestures or with less characterization than the other characters in their midst. This is something that I might even end up talking about at the PAX West lecture, but Volron strikes me as that kind of character. He very explicitly calls himself out. I think at the end of the second act, he identifies himself as Alphen's shadow, which I think is a really cool anti-parallel moment to Tales of Symphonia, where Mythos says, "Farewell, my shadow," at the end when he's talking maybe to the party, maybe to someone else, but he's identifying this antagonist to himself as a shadow, whereas Volron identifies himself as the protagonist's shadow in Tales of Arise. And I think a big part of what makes his character, for me, so resonant and hard and interesting is he is kind of the picture of like the avatar who has just been reduced to being used as an object by the player who decides everything he's going to do. So whereas Alphen and Dana's will is much more representative of like empowering individuals to act in a way that is fulfilling to themselves and also contributive to the community as a whole, Volron and Rena's will are kind of the shadow or mirror image of that. So that's a passing, I guess, second impression on my second playthrough of the game, but I'm going to be thinking more through it this week, especially as I work on that presentation, so we can definitely keep chatting about it. That is a really interesting question, Padre. Let me work through this fight for the sake of progressing the stream, and also to give me a moment to think about that, and then we'll get back to that. But if anyone else has thoughts on that, please answer Padre in the stream. I'm glad you appreciated that thought, and I think it's the kind of question you could ask probably of any character in, well, any Tales game, but especially Tales of Symphonia. Yeah, why would you be able to heal a character when there's a status ailment? Son of a bitch. Is it just that I got used to Arise that they're suddenly so much more challenging to me? I don't love it, but I do hate it. Oh, that's right. It is a risky encounter. That's fair. I'd forgotten that. Doesn't mean I'm not going to grumble about it. Eight-headed dragon. We're following up on that. All right. So. Well, I was mulling again the consideration of doing Grace's next, so you may sooner rather than later be in good company, Grail. Padre, so I think I talked a little bit about Genus during my playthrough of Symphonia Remastered. I think the thing that struck me more as an adult this time around about his character arc that either I didn't get as a kid or I just didn't care as much about was how closely he is a mirror to Mythos and how easy it would have been for him to walk Mythos's path. Like, I think even at the end of the game, he has like a clear bitterness and resentment towards humans, and it's kind of only by dint of his relationship with Lloyd and the rest of the party that he's able to like recognize that part of himself, but still make a different choice. I think the thing that was interesting to me during that remastered playthrough, even though I didn't really focus on Genus from the perspective of having him as the character I was controlling in battle or something like that, was like as a kid, the first time through the game, you're playing and this guy named Mythos comes along to the party and you kind of don't know, should you treat him as another party member? How long is he going to be with you? Whatever. So you're just kind of paying attention to this new character who's hanging out the first time through. And then, of course, afterwards, when you understand who Mythos is, like, it's very easy to get stuck in the focalized perspective of thinking about Mythos and the mind games he's playing with the party when he's going along with them and pretending he's just some kid. But as an adult, I was thinking much more about, wow, okay, what is the friendship that Genus is cultivating with Mythos representative of, and how might it be like sort of a temptation of Genus to choose a different path, and also kind of a way for Mythos to try to like reach out and get sympathies for the actions he's taken and the course he set for the world by saying like, if I can pretend to be a regular guy and get this other half-elf kid to see things the way that I did, that'll be one person who believes in me and validates my perspective, and that'll be enough. I feel like there's like a sad way to think about Genus through Mythos's eyes, and the kind of redemption that like maybe that might even be the last time Mythos is like giving him the chance to seek that redemption. And I think there's a lot to be said about how when Genus rejects him and doesn't choose that path, that really is kind of the final nail in Mythos's coffin in terms of him hardening to the world and not being willing to accept any other possible outcome or path, but recognize, as he does in the end, this is the path that I chose to walk. So I think, that's a long way of saying, if we were to play through it again and focus really squarely on Genus, I think it would be a really sad story about a kid who kind of measure by measure across the course of the story recognizes like how much he has lost or never really had by virtue of being a half-elf and everything that means as he learns more about the world. And also a story that probably would cast a different sort of portrait of Mythos and probably the way in which he bears on the game and world. Oh, damn, Pottery. I wish I had seen your message before I went off on my little riff. I'll do that next time, and then you can just you can type in the chat when it finally shows up. Yeah, Grail. That's part of why I wish that Genus and Zelos could have more moments of chatting and getting to know each other in an intimate way, because I think it's an interesting relationship where, like, I think Zelos, from an early point in his life, even before the party meets him, has lived with this hatred and resentment and prejudice. And so he's fully aware of that. And it's kind of like the party that reshapes that for him and gives him a different understanding of how it can be situated in the world. Whereas Genus, I feel like he goes from sort of having hope and this veneer of acceptance and coexistence with humans to having his hate like surfaced and bubbling over for the first time in his life over the course of the journey, and then kind of has to play catch up in a way that's even perhaps faster and hastier than Zelos has to. I think there's definitely more than a kernel of truth in that headcanon, Grail. Even just as I was thinking about it aloud right then, like, I don't even know if Mythos really knew what his like exact outcome would be if Genus sided with him, but I think he wanted something, whether that was a clear something or just a feeling, and he was clearly denied that, and I don't think that spelled anything good for him. Oh, that's true. The enemies are always out to get us. Although, ironically, it seems like when we stand perfectly still, it's like Sea Bear rules or whatever the relevant Night Stalker is. If you stand still, they can't see you. They only detect movement. Is that Predator? That's some kind of monster. Yeah, that's a great observation too, Padre. Yep. It's like in a funny way, even though like there is or can be a real traitor, like it strikes me there's a certain sense in which Genus is like the most apt to betray and walk away in a lot of ways, which is probably what Mythos sees in him, and yet Mythos also again, by dint of his relationship with Lloyd and the party and everyone, has the kind of character that allows him to accept that as a part of his character and identity without being ruled by it, which echoes a lot of what I talked about with Regal.
What makes you ask that all of a sudden?
Well, according to the song Grimm deciphered, Inominat is an 8-headed dragon, right? The Empyreans are supposed to be these holy beings, but using Therions to feed on malevolence sounds more sinister than divine to me.
You've got a point there. Empyreans are a type of Malachim, and that doesn't seem like any Malach we've seen. And even less so when we're talking an 8-headed dragon.
Is it so far-fetched?
What do you think will happen if the Therions come together in one place?
Well, it wouldn't be good. My guess is they'd merge together into a giant, horrific monster. The mighty beast will attack us with its 8 long, snake-like necks and 8 heads spitting hellfire!
I can see your worry.
Right? And that's 8 heads with only 6 of us to take them on. It'd be more than we could handle.
I'd have to conjure up a double or two.
You can do that?
Of course not.
Then why mention it?
Oh!
What is it, Laphicet?
Do you think each head would act of its own free will? Because if they do...
Yeah, I was going to talk about this afterwards, Pottery, because obviously this is right on the mark in terms of our previous conversation.
If we fight as one united whole, I know we can win.
Yes! If we work hand in hand, victory is ours. Right, everyone? Huh?
Us? United? Have you looked at us recently?
Well, I mean, maybe...
Yeah, Abysses is just unapologetically perfect, as we've talked about Grail. I think for me, it's also one of those rare cases where the intro song, Karma, is exactly as much of a banger in the original version and also the instrumental version that they did for the English release. Like, the Japanese lyrics are fantastic. The guitar riffs in place of vocalization are also great. I can't tell you the number of days and months and years across my life that have been radically motivated by that song. I had Dan translate the lyrics for me once, years ago, and unsurprisingly, they're super moving and in keeping with a lot of themes of the game. I mean, you can tell just from the name, Karma, right? But the rest of the lyrics ring true. Bump of Chicken! Talk about a memorable band name. Yep. There's nothing to do but win, win, win from that start.
Okay.
Yeah, so Pottery, you tell me whether you concur, but the best sense I can make in terms of the world understanding of Dragon, just based on the way they were speculating about the 8-headed dragon, is it sounds, and this feels right in the game, like it's just, they have a conception of it as some kind of bad, big, vicious monster, like this is a bad example, but like a super wolf or something, right? But they don't have any kind of deep understanding of the world's lore or like spiritual and metaphysical nature that would connect the identity of a dragon with something independently meaningful, like the Helionization of a person or a seraph. And that kind of makes sense with based on what they do and don't seem to know about the world throughout the rest of this. Yeah. So we'll see. Worth keeping track of, for sure, as we move forward here. Apparently you can die here. God, we are burning through life bottles. I don't like it. It's amazing to me that that Freeze Lancer hit Velvet. I have to remember to block. I got too used to just being able to dodge everything with perfect timing in Tales of Arise. Now I have to reset my expectations. I won't say I'm not seeing it, Grail. I felt okay at the beginning of the area, but shit seems to have hit the fan pretty quickly. The combination of melee attacks and arts and AoE arts versus specific straight shot arts is just delightfully overwhelming. Yeah, they are the devil. That's the real nexus of evil in this world. We solved it. Now, Innocence, you two are going on about, but remind me, that's one of the ones that has not been localized, right? So I can hear about how great it is, but cry deeply at not being able to access it in any easy way. Like so much of the Tales series. I should be grateful for what I have. It's not really so much that hasn't been localized, but I want it all to be localized. Reminds me of the very first bridge we crossed in Tales of Zestiria. Way back at the temple that would become the door to Camlon. Oh, although of course that one didn't have a waterfall that was getting in our way. Now if we change this, it'll get rid of the whole bridge, right? Oh, nice. The bridge stays. Well, I'm glad I checked that. I almost didn't bother to. Well, Grail, if you want to help a brother out and help me find that at some point, that would be deeply appreciated. Especially since I took the time to get a Vita. It'd be nice to have access to that. Don't know where to begin with that stuff. No, it's an elevator. Nice. I think without going back to it, Pottery and Grail can feel free to correct me or support me. I think it is an invisible bridge. So it's like it exists before they do anything to it, but they use an element to make it visible to actually walk across, and I think Mikleo uses ice as opposed to water. That's my recollection, at least. But it was probably a good, 70, 80 hours ago in our playtime at this point. Yeah, he makes it visible. So close, Pottery. I might be willing to say that's close enough. In a game where Saray so clearly enacts a Jesus narrative in a wide range of other ways. I hadn't thought of that as another Christian allusion, but it strikes me as pretty right on the money.
Is there some sort of trick to it?
Well, you could always try busting through it, but I wouldn't. Who knows what sort of traps you might trigger?
I know. Look at that diamond-shaped stone in the door. Haven't we seen that somewhere else?
You're right. It was on the pedestal with that chalice.
That huge thing? You must have some sharp eyes there.
I was more interested in what was inside that chalice.
So, what? That chalice is the key?
Somehow I doubt it'll be that simple. Some stones are colored, and some aren't. It must hold some kind of significance.
I think you're right.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Grail. one of the very first things, actually, I wrote for With a Terrible Fate back when it was just my blog working through Majora's Mask rather than a publication for the story of video games. I think I try to ambush me. I am actually going to pause so they don't ambush me in the middle of this. Yeah, the fourth thing I ever published on it was all about the music-driven storytelling of Majora's Mask. Oh, I'm sorry, Pottery. It's going to be like catching lightning in a bottle to get the fidget to line up with Aaron's timing here. But yeah, I think, I think as video game storytelling continues to mature, a really cool thing is that more and more people are recognizing what a central role music plays in it. But it's so true. Someone else, I think, if memory serves, wrote a really cool article for the site on the music in Earthbound. Well, I already have the site up. I guess I'll just drop that too if I can find it. Where is it? The music of Earthbound. The chromatic scale of life. Great article. There's a great tidbit in this one, just kind of showing that you don't need that much data to be able to make a great story. Yeah, so the size of the entire Earthbound ROM, right, is 3.2 megabytes, which is smaller than the average MP3 file at 3.5 megabytes, and significantly smaller than the average PS4 save file at 10 megabytes. So kind of apple and oranges, right? But I mean, Earthbound is so rightly well known for its incredibly thoughtful and moving, and to use your word, thematic and well-fit music. And it doesn't take much, right? I mean, games can evolve in a lot of ways, but a lot of it at the end of the day is just artistic sensibility. I think games like Majora's Mask, like Tales of the Abyss, that are so self-consciously focused on music are great, like archetypal examples of that. But I think even in games where music is more of just one aspect of the storytelling rather than a centerpiece of the story, you really feel it, especially as you're navigating a range of these games in quick succession with one another. Like, you get a feel for, as you say, whether the music is reinforcing the story or if it's kind of doing like the opposite thing that the story's doing and maybe trying to create a dissonance that can be equally interesting. Or, you know, in the case of maybe a game that didn't think through the music as carefully, it's just doing its own thing with no relation to the story, which is never quite as satisfying. Yeah, that's the tip of the iceberg with music too. I mean, we're kind of gamer audiophiles with a terrible fate, so I'm sure if you end up interested in that topic and you like what you read there, I'm sure I can dig up more for you as well. Pottery, I don't want to put the cart before the horse or make any preemptive announcements because this is not something that I am personally working on, but without preempting any announcements, I will just say I have not played Outer Wilds, but I've heard of it, and I have had extended conversations with someone who is a very cool contributor and whose views I really respect on creating some really interesting analytical works around Outer Wilds, especially in reference to its music. So if you love Outer Wilds, if you love thinking about music, stay tuned, is all I'll say. Wow, what a thing to say, Grail. That alone makes me really eager to play it. I will say, I meant to mention this in passing earlier when Eisen first showed up on this stream, but I loved Tales of Arise's EX dungeon the first time through. It was such a joy to replay it, especially having just played Zestiria and now working through Berseria. There's so much of that game that I love, but talk about EX dungeons that stay with you and really seem to have a message and are not just filler content. I've held Arises up in that regard, I guess for the last 2 years since I first played it. Yeah, cheers, Pottery. It's definitely high on the list, so if and when I do get to it, I will definitely hit you up about it. I've heard enough about it through through this other person who shall for now remain nameless to know that it's a really thoughtful and smart and well put together game, which I am all about. Now, straddling this gap I'm not all about, but I am all about that. Yeah, I loved it all. I will say the Destiny callback, especially since that was the one that I hadn't played before, and now I have played Destiny, like getting able to wander through its caverns again with Destiny's really cool music. Its navigation music, but also especially its battle scene. I'm such a nerd for that. It was really great to go and live through that again. I'll share a one paragraph story about that, and you all are the perfect audience to appreciate this because it's such vintage Tales. So I was playing through this and I was excited because I remembered like, oh yeah, the final boss of this is Kronos, and I went through Tales of Destiny now and I faced off against Kronos, so now I'll finally be able to understand it and have all these cool insights. But of course, I made the rudimentary mistake of confusing Kronos with a K from Tales of Destiny with Tales of Kronos with a CH from Tales of Zestiria 2, which I of course have not played yet. So, reason to replay Tales of Arise for a third time, I guess, once I get through the Zillias. But yeah, I felt like a proper fool. Yeah, the danger never goes away. I almost moved right out of that. It sure is, Pottery. But Kronos with a K is the final antagonist of Tales of Destiny. And I was so mad because the thing that really pissed me off was, especially with the first of the 6 realms in the EX dungeon of Arise being the Tales of Destiny world, I had concocted this whole really interesting and believable story in my head of like, okay, if they end with the primary antagonist of Destiny, I could see a lot of interesting ways in which that kind of elaborates and comments on the core themes of Arise, and maybe it gives us a different perspective on Rena and the third act of the story. And then, of course, I had to pick all of that up and throw it away in the trash immediately when I realized, oh, no, it's a totally fucking different character. But you live and you learn. Yeah, well, if nothing else, it pushed the Zillia duology up into a higher priority on my list just because of spite, which is the best reason to reorganize your list for something like Tales of Praxis, right? Oh, that was the other thing you missed, Grail. I don't think I mentioned this after you came in, but I picked up in like a very casual way, since I'm working through this and also, working on catching up on analytical articles, Tales of Fantasia. So I'm thinking I'll probably try to keep this sequestered as like bedtime gaming to like, play in bed for an hour or 45 minutes right before I pass out. But there are a lot of the ones that I haven't played yet, which I'm hoping to play, but I also figured it has been a minute since I played Fantasia, and I would really like to get a fresh perspective on it with all of these other games in my head, and especially while the Tales of Symphonia games are in my head. So I'm only like an hour into that, but already really enjoying it. See, Grail, now we've reached the point where you know me well enough that you're baiting me, and you're baiting me, and we both know that I'm going to be delighted to take the bait anyway, so it works out well for everyone. But hey, all the more reason to go back and play Arise again, and I can't get enough of that, so it works out. Is this a monolith without writing on it? Oh, okay, but it has a symbol, which might be important. So this is the teardrop symbol. I think the game heard me giving its puzzle shit and made the puzzle more complicated, so I'll probably want to keep track of this. We all the way back. Yeah, we're back at the beginning. Okay. Did I just totally turn myself around without realizing it? I might have. Okay, so that room warps us back there. There were other waterfalls that had been going and we stopped when we drained those chalices, right? Where were they? Interact with every jewel? Fantastic. I'll do that. Oh, I see. Yes, so we're trying to light up the jewels that correspond with the door, and then we need the other route that we just opened in order to get back. Yes, okay. I understand now. Does it at least flag where the jewels are? I can't tell. The one we just hit certainly is, but I don't remember whether there are ones on the side. I guess we can check. We are vibing. Yeah, okay. Is this one glowing? It was glowing. Okay. Oh my god. Oh, there's a way to skip it. Yes. It's like just in that uncanny valley between it being long enough to skip and short enough not to bother. Which just means I end up watching about half of it before I decide to skip.
Don't waste my time.
This one I want to go after for revenge as much as anything. Oh yeah? It's a good review, Grail. Any highlights or key things to tease us with to encourage us to check it out? And what was it you were reading, Pottery? I don't know that you told us what you were working on. I'm gonna say this one looks like it's glowing based on the other one. I don't want to go through that whole song and dance with the animation again. And so we go back to the other side. It's not glowing? You serious? Am I stupid, or is it just hard to tell? Oh, yes! Okay. Well, you say that, and yes, of course I'm going to remember. I think I had it in my head that was an anime as opposed to something you were reading, though. That's why I was confused. That's not glowing. That's definitely dark compared to the other one. Grail, are you messing with me, or are they not all supposed to be lit up? So I did not check on the door thoroughly enough to know this off the top of my head. Yeah, that's what it was at before. What are you doing to me, dude? Are you saying this is wrong? This is what I left it at when I left the room. I'm just gonna go back and look at the door. It'll take like 2 seconds. Stupid Aaron should have just taken a picture of the door when we had a chance. It's okay, Grail. It's alright. I should have just done the puzzle the way I would if I were sitting down to do it, as opposed to trying to manage it on the stream. I would say for better. I would put that in the common Grail W's column if I were keeping score. Okay. Great. Oh, and now, of course, these stupid demons are going to be coming after me while I try to get a picture of the door. I'll just kill them first. Speaking of barriers. As you know, I'm trying to be as charitable as possible to these games, especially as we're working through them, but Pottery, I'm inclined to agree with that at this point. Yeah, well, I think as I look at the door for more than 2 seconds, it looks like it's kind of... Like, I think if you think about the door three-dimensionally, it's kind of pointing in the, like, in the direction that each gem is positioned in. Like the glowing water drop, that's back this way relative to the room, so it might be giving us more help than we realized. Yeah, I might end up throwing a holy bottle, honestly, if this nonsense keeps up. Yeah, I might switch back to Eisen as the main after this. Seem to be working better. Boy, I'll tell you, Grail, jokes of yours from the stream that have permeated my everyday life, and I can't get out of my head now. The joke you made about the meme where, like, every time someone falls over, you just, like, Eisen shows up and shouts, "You're wide open!" Like, literally every day now, whenever my dog comes up to me and, like, flops on her side for a belly rub, the first thing I will do without thinking about it is shout at her, "You're wide open!" And she's gotten used to it now, which, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I guess what you would expect from Aaron Sudoku's dog, for better or worse. But yeah, that's my life now. And it's your fault, is what I'm saying. Okay. I'm gonna just jank it and take a picture of this door so we don't have to come back here. And now Aaron will have a source of truth about it. Yeah, I'm with you, Pottery. I wish they had a slightly bigger well to draw from in terms of the catchphrases for the Break Souls. It is interesting, though. I mean, like you said, you hear them so many times that something like Velvet shouting "Devour" gets burned into your head, and so when you go back, like I did at the top of the stream, and read the little bit of the storybook song that we got, and the word "devour" is very directly used to describe what the mouths of the 8-headed dragon are doing to feed an Ominot, that bears remembering. So sometimes the language is helpful, but a lot of times it does just feel like a lack of variety. What the hell is this little thing? Is there something there before or something? It's so weird. I want to be able to do something with it. Devour, 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 devour. Yeah, the variety does definitely help, especially after just so many different battles. Helps keep you engaged. God damn it, you called it out and I missed it, Pottery, because I was trying to catch up on the chat. I'll keep trying to find it. We'll get it before the end of this stream. That's my goal. Okay, so this bright one is right. And the water one was dulled out, so that's good. We can't get down from here, because of course that would be too easy. At least now there's a method, so we'll get through it. This is going to be a bit of a grind. Boy, the crew really does know how to hype up literally every Tales game except the one that we're playing at any given moment. Yeah, that's another one that I don't remember for its humor, Pottery, but I also played it many years ago at this point, so especially after appreciating all of the humor in, well, really in Zestiria most of all, I would say. Be fun to go back for it and look for that more in that lens. Shut up, Grail, we're finding things to like about this. We did a whole miniature, very explicit esoteric study last stream. That was fucking cool. No one can take that away from us, no matter how much they may try. The lock of the sacred sealed door is governed by the blue and white jewels of the 7 chalices. When the jewels of the chalices shine, the jewels of the door shall shine alike. When the 7 jewels shine in unison, the way to the inner sanctum shall open. God damn it! So Grail is fucking right. It's not to emulate what the door is showing. The door is just showing the current status of the jewels. And so we do need to make them all light up. Alright, well, I was premature like 2 minutes ago. Now we have a game plan for what it is we actually have to do. If Grail had given me the right advice and also accurately told me what to do with each of the jewels, we probably would have gotten through this slightly faster. Well, that's a great question, Grail, and I have a really sophisticated explanation. It's because when I read everything aloud in the same voice, I get really bored over the course of a 50-hour game. Is that a good enough reason? Not everything on Tales of Praxis has 5 layers of erudition to it. That word was erudition, if that was unclear. I woefully slurred that pronunciation. Is there a preference? I guess this is a good time to ask. Do y'all prefer if I read that sort of text out loud or in my head? So I don't really care. I just kind of call it based on what kind of text I think will be interesting. And that text I figured I would call out just because, for better or worse, the navigation of this puzzle has become a major aspect of this stream. So I figured it would be nice to introduce it to the speechcraft. Oh, hopefully English class in a fun way, as opposed to a lame or enervating way. It's one of my long-term goals, Pottery. I hope to be able to get lessons on video game storytelling right alongside books and film and such in English class one of these days. But that is a long-term goal. All right, we did it, friends. Long-term goal, but also in the microcosm, it's very much what we're doing on this stream, as y'all are already calling out. So, I'm glad that's an experience that you keep coming back for. Yeah, that's a fair point, Grail. It did occur to me, like, when I was first doing these, I didn't imagine why someone would have it on without actually watching it, but then, like, even myself personally, sometimes I'll go back to listen to or check things on previous streams, and sometimes I'll just let it run without actively watching things, so maybe by making a bit more of a constant effort to read some of the text would be useful in that regard. I just don't want it to be, like, tedious for people who are watching, but we can try to mix it up a bit. No, good feedback, Podry, thank you. Well, Grail, I mean, when you put it like that, how can I not be excited? Okay, I know you said inchoate you learned from the article, Grail. Were there any other standout words that you not only looked up, but were grateful to have learned? Hey, Juyodark. I hope I'm pronouncing that at least okay. Pleasure to see you. Thanks for finding the stream. It's an English-speaking stream, so you're welcome to it. I just won't be in a position to answer you because I don't speak. I was going to say Spanish. I think that's what you're speaking. If it's not, I apologize. But it's a pleasure to have you, and I think in some ways at least the language of video game storytelling and JRPGs is universal, so much the better for that. Portuguese, that would have been my second guess. It didn't look quite like the Spanish I took when I was in elementary school. All right, buckle up, buckaroos.
I feel the power coming from further inside.
How very intriguing.
Yeah, there you go, Pottery. It's not littered with puns in the same way Zestiria is, but you can see how they're planting the seeds for the pun culture that would evolve in later ages. Yeah, well, for what it's worth, your English reads great to me. That's perfectly understandable and much better than my 0 words of Portuguese. So cheers to that. Yeah, my rule for like analysis and rhetoric in general, and what I tell my analysts in terms of vocabulary and expression is, always do what you need to make yourself clear, make arguments that are compelling and meaningful to the gamers who love these games and want to see them in a different way. And if you need a special word to express what you're saying, don't be afraid to shy away from it, but don't use vocabulary just for the sake of it. So hopefully that comes through in my own work. I don't like the idea of word dropping just for the sake of it, but I find that when you're trying to really hone in and get precise with digging into what it is that makes a game special or makes anything special, it can be useful to leverage a wider range of vocabulary just for the sake of precision of concepts as much as anything. Oh no, Pottery, we're cursed. Is that it? She took it out and looked at it? Okay, yes, I saw that. So Eleanor does the same thing? All right. 4th time's the charm, I guess, in this particular instance. Well, after we get out of this hellish dungeon, maybe I will switch back to Eleanor for a bit, and we'll see if we can catch her doing the same thing. That is such a specific movement. It's really interesting that they both have it. Not something as generic as adjusting your boot or something. Jesus Christ! I forgot about this one. But now I vividly remember it instantly.
Well, there you are.
Ugh. Yeah, maybe not with it with the level design, but the enemy design is definitely chilling and memorable.
Another Therion. Just as Velvet conjectured, each of the 7 heads seems to assume a different form.
The sensation! It was here!
Oh, look at that. I guess your hunch panned out too, kiddo.
This is just how I felt in Ward Forest. That must have been an Earth Pulse point back
I'm gonna try, Grail. I'm gonna try. Can we remember? I was meaning to ask this the last time it came up, but that like representation of Laphicet's Therion sensation, the ripple effect that just happened, was the first time that happened in Warg Forest, or did we see it earlier in the story, like with like the Advent or Laphicet Velvet's brother or anything like that? Because I don't think we did, but I couldn't remember, and it's bothering me because clearly it's becoming a key element of Laphicet, the Malik's character arc and sensibilities.
Well, what are we going to do with this one? Can we get it to shrink like that bug of yours?
I don't care whether it lives or dies. As long as we defeat it and take out one of Inominat's heads, that's all that matters.
I mean, it also matters that it is probably almost definitely that woman's kid, right? I mean, we see the kid in there.
Try not to let it eat you.
That'd be very uncomfortable.
Oh, Milob status effects. So good. God damn it. Yeah, for reference, Grail, I immediately understand why you had such PTSD about this boss. Okay, that's right, so we can quick step out of a guard. I think I'd forgotten that, so hopefully that'll help at least a little. Ooh, we got the dragon dive in with Aizen. I think that was the first time. Small steps. Velvet, come on. Gonna burn through our life bottles. Yeah. Maybe we should switch to Velvet. Let's try that. That might help. I don't know if you meant that to sound so enigmatic in English, Geodark, but that's quite a comment. I like that. That's true. I did have the thought that it might be nice just to have Moduli devouring spells for this one. But, I don't know, running Velvet seems to have gone okay for the last 5 seconds, so let's try that. Alright, I'm gonna try Moduli. It's fast, that's the problem. Gotta really be ready with that trigger. Come on. Son of a bitch. Oh, and then of course when I'm ready to use it, it's not actually usable. Don't have the shit for it. I'm going back to Velvet. We are gonna properly run out of life bottles. It's a thin silver lining, but I'll take it, Grail. I'll take it. I heard AI Monkey will actually use Spell Absorber a second ago. That was nice. So it does happen once in a blue moon, at least. Yeah, isn't it so nice when you're allowed to use the things that the game gives you to use because you're not a crazy person out to punish yourself? Isn't that such a cool feature of games? No, you see, Pottery, you're overlooking the key fact that Grail hates himself, so it doesn't count. Tree has it coming, Judark. No feeling sorry for the tree. Not allowed. Tree was asking for it. Pottery coming out strong with things you do when you hate yourself. Me fighting Malenia because I love Miyazaki in spite of myself. That's the reason. And you better believe I'm going to disappear right back into it when Shadow of the Air Tree comes out in 10 to 15 years. We're gonna make it! We're gonna fucking make it! There it is. Ooh, what an unsettling sound.
I don't think this Therion's getting any smaller.
Thank you, Grail. I don't know if I deserve the GG, but I will take it.
The demon again!
I think that's the thing about Malenia for me that just kind of breaks my head, and it would be interesting to do just like, not even a character, but a mechanical study of her in terms of like what she says about Miyazaki's style of storytelling, because I completely agree with you, Pottery. Like, I lost my mind fighting her. There was so much suffering. There were so many times when I gave up, and yet for all that, it was like a deeply fun and engaging fight and experience. I guess kind of similar to what I felt with Genichiro Ashina, but kind of cranked up to 11 in a way that was not really the same focus of the experience in Sekiro. And I think that says a lot about kind of the highs and lows of his particular formulation of storytelling. I mean, yeah, that sounds like something that surely exists within the community, that kind of mod, so I'd be more surprised if that weren't the case. I know, Grail. Are you talking about the nature of this Therion? I called it out right away. It was the first thing I said when we started this fight. I think it's Eleanor who doesn't know, based on that. Oh my god, break my heart game. Jesus.
Is that Therion eating the demon?
It's the perfect heartbreaking mirror to Saracen Velvet back in the
Therion.
the prison.
It ate her. Malevolence must refer to demons then.
Feeding on demons. I know what that's like.
Mommy. Look, it turned into a little
Oh
girl.
man.
Is that Kamoana?
Mommy, why? Why did you leave me all alone? Did I do something wrong? Was I too weak? I'm sorry, Mommy. I'm sorry.
No, this can't be happening.
Yeah, a mirror and an aspect grail. Like, I was just sitting here thinking, what an interesting way to kind of reveal the part of Velvet that is still just a scared, trapped little girl who feels deeply unsafe in the world and is trying to make sense of it without, like, reducing Velvet's character to that or compelling her to admit that herself. Like, to be able to see that by traveling the world and seeing what other Therions are like and the kind of common language of suffering between them, I think, is a really compelling way of situating Velvet's struggle within the broader context of the world and what the Abbey is up to and everything.
I tried so hard to be strong for you, Mommy. The man from the Abbey made me strong. So please, Mommy, please come back.
The Abbey made her strong?
By turning her into a Therion? Jeez, those Abbey jokers really get off on this sacrifice stuff, don't they?
I can't believe it. That woman, she was trying to save her own daughter.
Mommy! Mommy! I miss you. Mommy!
Dying, unable to save her daughter, all she could do was offer herself to feed her hungry child.
No, this is my fault.
So, should we bring her with us?
Someone like her will only slow us down.
That Therion isn't going anywhere.
Shut the fuck up, Oscar. Jesus Christ, this fucking guy. Yeah, Grail, I feel you on, like, some of the Therions being plants or animals, but I almost find myself wondering, does that make it better or worse? Like, even just the little montage of Laphicet finding and trying to care for the, we decided at the end of the day last time it was a stag beetle, right? Who emerged from the Therion that we found in the woods. It's like, especially when someone like Laphicet reaches out and sympathizes with this creature, I feel much less like, oh, we have an out from the tragic backstory of the human Therions, and more like those plants and animals are probably suffering just as much, but in a language and form of life that we have no way of understanding as people, which almost makes it sadder for me because we have no point of like access to be able to relate to it or help them. But I guess that's kind of sadly just as true with any of the Therions, right? Which is part of Velvet's whole struggle, where even if you can hear their language, like this kid here, there's no way to really reach out and help them and ameliorate their struggles.
Oscar, what is the Abbey doing? Please tell me, I have to know.
Eleanor, the less you know, the better.
I must know.
We're trying to build
And then
a
the mother-
motherfucking spaceship. No, wrong Tales game. I'm sorry.
So she must have devoured the demon. But don't let that trouble you. The demon was a necessary sacrifice to bring an end to this world's pain and suffering.
That wasn't just some demon. She was a mother. She was all this girl had. Her one and only mother.
Oh man, this poor girl. Eleanor, I
As
mean.
it may, those who possess strong wings must.
Velvet was not in the mood for that.
It's not nice to make a girl cry.
Kamawana.
It's now or never.
Out of the way, Laphicet.
Wait. Have you no compassion?
If you say one more thing to me about
This
birds.
isn't up for discussion.
I thought you just wanted to weaken Unominat. You can sever the link. You don't have to kill her. Velvet!
Oh, someone's had a change of heart. Apparently, a woman's tears truly do have
I
friends.
mean, that is the rational thing to do, right?
I'm just curious about something Grimoire said. I can always kill this one later.
If we're taking her with us, we'd better grab her and go. No sense lingering in the enemy's territory.
Hey, Kamawana. My name's Laphicet. Do you want to come with me and my friends and get out of here?
Where's my mommy? I'll be lonely without her.
You're not alone, sweetie. I promise. Even if she's far away, your mother will always be looking over you.
Oh,
How do you
man.
know?
Because that's what my mother does for me, too.
Let's go, Kamawana.
Okay.
It's interesting to think about the change of connotation that Tales of Berseria brings about, leading us to reconsider a lot of familiar concepts or even just turns of phrase from everyday language. Like, it's supernatural and inspiring and kind of heartfelt to say, oh, you know, if someone you know passes away or moves away or whatever, like, you carry their spirit with you, and it's as if they're with you even if they're not really there, because, you know, their intentions and way of life and what they wished for you is inside you. But then to take something like that that's very kind of sanitized and spiritual and say instead, oh yeah, you're like devouring that person and consuming them and taking up their essence inside of you and ingesting it. Like, in a way, it evokes the same thing, but it does so using such a more visceral and kind of unsettling image. So especially with that conversation between Eleanor and Kamoana, it struck me as an interesting way of straddling that gap where, like, there's something horrifying and monstrous about, for example, what Velvet did with Ceres, but there's also a way in which it is deeply resonant with what Eleanor is doing with just carrying on the memory of her mother, who much more relatably killed, and Eleanor is trying to carry on her spirit inside of her. So especially as we get it further into this game and think about, like, how does the moral intersect with ideas of the demonic and exorcists and everything like that, and where does this party fall? I think thinking about points of comparison and contrast like that will help us to navigate the waters. No pun intended, I guess. Yeah, that was a pretty good W. We should count that one for definitely at least several for Eleanor. But yeah, and this is a small point, but while I paused already, like, when I said, isn't that the rational thing to do? Like, I grant that what we got from the storybook is still relatively esoteric and hard to scrutinize at this point because that's how those texts work. But it seemed to be the group consensus that in the event that the Therions were killed, they would just be reborn or reincarnated or whatever. So it would be very easy for Artorias and the Abbey to continue with their scheme to resurrect Innominat. Whereas if the Therions were just found and liberated but not killed, then presumably that would be a more direct way to stop whatever the Abbey was trying to do. So, I mean, it seemed like, as much as this might be the anti-rationalist group of heroes we're following along, that did strike me as a pretty rational thing for Velvet to do in terms of not killing off Kamoana. Yeah, that's the next counter we need to keep track of as we progress on this journey, right, Krail? How many kidnappings? The other thing that was cool just about that esoteric exegesis of the text that Laphicet found last time, I didn't catch this, and then I was rewatching the stream. It also talks about how part of what will take it longer to decipher is not only does it have the source text, but it also contains right there within it a bunch of, like, commentary and interpretation of the text, which, again, not to beat the point about Jewish mysticism with a dead horse, but it's clearly something that the Tales teams are familiar with and think a decent amount about, because that's all of Tales of the Abyss, and you even get it coming up in games like Dawn of the New World as well. And that's a big part of how Jewish mysticism works. Like, you have the core texts like the Torah, but you also have, like, droves and droves of like literal just texts of interpretation where rabbis are giving different, like, esoteric readings of, you know, look at this particular passage, or even, you know, this, like, tonal shift across these sentences in the Bible, and this is, like, the hidden meaning contained within it. And mystic practices are just as much about studying and coming to an understanding of those works of commentary as they are about, like, the source underlying texts that are being interpreted. So it was really cool to see such a concise but well-articulated case study of that in a Tales game. Okay, so that's the next topic of philosophical inquiry, Pottery. What is the dripness of Kamoana? We have to analyze its form and its content. Alright, we're unlocking some grade bonuses. Oh, and speaking of Velvet begrudgingly coming to realize that she cares about things other than revenge against Artorias, deciding in a quiet, optional, not voiced moment not to kill Oscar when he's down for the count because she doesn't want to add things to Eleanor's plate. She wants to help Eleanor cope. What a cool, understated moment. Speaks volumes about her growth. Yes, good on you, Pottery, for keeping me honest with the important priorities of our stream. Oh, I need to actually make her the leader.
Understood.
Yeah, poor Oscar is like the lord of the elves. Like, he has a worse go of it than even the Schwann Brigade in Vesperia. Maybe it's because she just had to deal with something so harrowing down there that she's utterly fidgetless. Wait, you love everything except the dress. Like, what else is there, Pottery? Do you mean like the jacket and the boots? I feel like if you were to ask me about her outfit, I would feel like the dress is the primary thing. All right, well, we'll give it another go later. Maybe when she's had time to emotionally process, she'll be a little more fidgety. Oh, I see what you mean, just the volume of it. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm far from an expert, well, frankly, on any kind of fashion, but especially women's clothing. But I think there is something that, in a pedestrian way, is kind of interesting to me about how, I agree, this poofiness feels kind of off, whereas, like, Shion's dress in Tales of Arise, it's got to be similarly poofy, if not more so, but it feels much more of a piece with her character and isn't as dissonant to me on first glance. Yeah, the way she clasps her hands with a kind of firmness. There you go. Do we know what the object is? I feel like that's what she pulled out when she was reminiscing about her past before. Is it like a picture of her mom or something? It's got to be something calling back to how her village and mom were killed by demons.
Good. The Malevolence is
Oh
getting
boy,
stronger.
I can see it.
My, the effects are already starting to show.
Was I just not paying attention? Because that feels like a leap. I mean, I know that they called out Malevolence when they witnessed the Therion eating the demon. So they're like, oh, this must be what Malevolence is. But now to be able to recognize that what, to us, is a very familiar effect in the air from Zestiria of these dark particles, for them to recognize that as Malevolence, that feels like an inference they shouldn't be able to make yet. Am I being unfair, or do you all agree with that? Yeah, that symbolism tracks for me, Pottery. Grail, why would Eisen and Magilu have reason to know about it? Just because they've been around longer? Or is it something that, like, we don't know and we discover later in the story? Yeah, I guess that makes sense to me, Pottery. I guess maybe I'm just feeling like, for all the conversation in all of the, skits and travels across the game, it's weird to me that there's not some kind of conversation where they explicitly connect those dots. But I suppose when you put it that way, it would be a reasonable inference to draw. Yeah, I mean, he's been around for a while, Grail, but I mean, and this is a real question that I have, so I think it's interesting. Do we know how long? Because, like, he did not seem to, like, he doesn't have a clear explanation or like, firsthand experience, at least as far as he's letting on, about, like, what the storybook is referencing in terms of the deep past of Innominat and the war between Innominat and the four Empyreans and what it is to consume malevolence. So, I get the idea of a Malik being around for longer, but I'm not sure how much of a beat we have on his exact age in this. Yeah, okay, I hope so. I'll keep my my eyes and ears peeled for that. I guess it does make sense. The more we're talking about it, I'm thinking about it. Like, I mean, they spent time thinking about just the mechanics of what it would mean for a Therion to be consuming malevolence last time when they were just trying to understand the book. And so then for them to see the Therion consuming a demon, and then for the Therion to be released and the environment to instantly change like this, I mean, it would still be an inference you would need to draw, but I can see how that wouldn't be the craziest leap in the world. Because what else would suddenly cause the environment to change that dramatically? I would kind of expect that, you know, given that dramatic shift, and especially if it's enough for them to realize what's going on, they would, you know, be a little more surprised by it or make a bigger deal about it. But now I feel like I'm just nitpicking a little bit. Can we quick jump? That would be just so nice. I assume we're going back to Haria? No, looks like we're just going back this way. Where is it that we're traveling? Maybe if I can just see it on the map. Oh yeah, maybe this is one of the ones we can just use the gate to go to, actually. I don't know if the bottle will help us with this one. That'll also do it. Thank you, Grail. We got tripped up on the puzzle, but at least we figured out the fast travel in short order. Man, that is one thing that felt like an old friend in Tales of Arise, the ease of fast travel to wherever you needed to go. I really like the way they pulled that off in that one. I'll say pottery just while we're talking about it for a second. Like, I definitely, as I've gotten older, have appreciated systems that give you the option and the quality of life while still encouraging you to not always or even not often use it. Like, without taking the bait to go deep into a Xenoblade Chronicles discussion, that was one of the things that I really loved, especially about Xenoblade Chronicles 3. It's a giant world, there's too much to do there, and so if you want to complete it in under like 300 hours, you're gonna have to use fast travel. But also the world is so engaging and rewarding to just navigate and experience, and you get more insights just by spending more time in it, that more often than not, especially as you're just running along on quests, even if you have, strictly speaking, the option to fast travel, you won't want to take advantage of it. And so I think that's kind of the best world, because like the very act of having that quality of life makes it easy on you, but also if you have it and you're not using it, that really demonstrates your level of engagement with the world and recognizing that, like, no, this is worth my time to actually experience and go through, as opposed to just jump to the next thing. Yeah, I think I might spend more time with Eleanor next. I was debating which character to jump into after this, but we can also jointly decide as a group for sure. Yeah, so pottery, I think you and I are on the same wavelength. Your comment about Vesperia is very much what I was trying to call out about Xenoblade Chronicles 3 as well. Because there are times when you're going to want it, right? Especially when you're like sprinting through a game for an instrumental purpose, like I was doing with my Tales of Arise playthrough, right? Or if you're trying to do a lot of end game cleanup and you've already spent like 100 hours on the game or something like that. But to have that as the exception rather than the rule in terms of how you default to navigating, I think is the sweet spot for me. Yeah, I feel like we're all more or less on the same wavelength about it. It's true, I haven't played around with Laphicet that much yet. Well, we'll see what the group is feeling next time we get to combat.
Grim, what's up? Did you come to share something else you found in that book?
Haven't really done Rokuro since the duel either. That could be fun.
I'm afraid the Malevolence has grown too dense for me to hole up at the inn reading.
I'm gonna be real with you. The world is super fucked up now. Okay, so this is a cool coda to what we were needling at on the way out of that dungeon. Like, the party got and intuited what was going on with the Malevolence and drew the inference, but they clearly didn't really understand what that meant. So it is cool to see the distinction between those two things of like recognizing the Malevolence without really understanding what the Malevolence consisted in, and now seeing what it actually fucking does.
The hell? What's that coming out of their bodies?
Malevolence. They're all hitting their limits.
Okay, so Magilu does clearly, as you were alluding to, Grail, seem to have a deeper understanding of this, but I think it's fair to say we don't know why yet at this point in the story.
Even the inn girl! Why is this happening?
As a joke, mostly.
Their malevolence is spilling over.
The Malevolence. All of that energy spilling from their bodies? That's what causes the demon blight?
Wow, the party is learning so much about the world in these last couple streams.
Do you know what demon blight really is? What demons are?
We're in deep Act 2 territory now, my friends. One of my favorite territories.
Track them down at all costs.
We'll talk later.
Okay, but you're gonna tell me everything you know.
With these demons. Let's get back to the ship while we can.
Also, I want to know more about your sister. So yeah, I mean, I think the next step in our own ontology of this world that we're continuing to construct, if we take Zestiria as our starting point, because like, remember there, we had this idea that, okay, malevolence is the friction between people's beliefs and what they do in the world, and when those things don't align, it creates this malevolence that corrupts them, either gradually or precipitously, depending on a lot of different factors. And then morality is secondary to that, where it's a precondition on doing good or bad things in the world that you have this kind of purity of alignment between what you believe and what it is that you're doing. Now notice we have this kind of mythopoeic, you could say, overlay in terms of like the origins of the world and the preconditions that made that possible, with this idea of Innominat and these Therions in this kind of ritualistic context where the Therions are used to absorb malevolence and thereby bring about Innominat. So I think we have a good sense of what malevolence is, and symbolically, at least what it meant in the storytelling of Zestiria, we have less of a firm sense yet of what Innominat really is and what it represents. And so I think it'll be as we get more clarity into what the actual nature of Innominat is and how that links up with Therions, that will be able to then make sense of what like where all this malevolence is coming from in this context. Because directly, just in terms of the plot, of course, I think the explanation is like, you know, the Therions are set up to be consuming malevolence, so we remove the Therion from the cage that the Abbey put there. Of course, the malevolence is just going to spread out. But in terms of how that actually fits into things like the overall ecosystem of metaphysical stuff in the world, and why it was there in the first place and why it's spilling out, and how that fits into the cyclical nature of the world that kicks things off in Zestiria and presumably is still going on at this earlier point in the world. I think what I would say is that feels like an open question at this point in the story. Yeah, I mean, I had definitely been planning on doing it Grail. I don't remember if I did it the first time. I had been figuring it would be a good thing to do for Tales of Praxis anyway, but especially if it delves into the deeper lore of the world, I don't see why we wouldn't. I feel like we went in here already. Maybe? Oh yeah, we did, because the treasure chest was at the end. We're going in the right direction, right? Yeah, we're going to Isil Docks. Wonder, can we fast travel now? Oh, do we have to use another bottle? Keep forgetting about that. It's hard for me, Pottery, and definitely after several people have called me out on missing random ones of them, I have been trying not to avoid them. If anything, I'm just trying to be mindful of, if we can, finishing this like episode's worth of plot before we wrap up the stream this evening. So it's all in the service of time management, as much as anything.
Come on, really?
I'll tell you, the other thing that is really fun for me about playing through this right after Zestiria is so much of the Tales game's storytelling, as I'm sure you know and we've talked about before, is predicated on very carefully like constructing mysteries and only revealing certain aspects of the nature of the world to the characters and to the player at certain points. And sometimes you get the full picture of things by the end of the game. Sometimes things are still left as open questions. And I think the first time I was playing through Tales of Berseria, one of the reasons that I had trouble tracking that and was missing it was because I hadn't played Tales of Zestiria right before it, but I recognized that it was a prequel to Zestiria, and so I oftentimes found myself, whenever there were like mysteries going on in the plot, like we're talking through now in terms of what the Malevolence has to do with the rest of this world, I found myself thinking like, well, you know, maybe they talked about that in Zestiria and I just don't remember super well. And so it was therefore hard for me to tell like what was an open question in Berseria period versus what were they just drawing on or implying from Zestiria. And it can be hard to know what to do with the overall contours of a game's story when you can't answer those questions for yourself as a reader. Now, of course, we're able to have Zestiria super fresh in our minds, and so we're able to dig a little further into it and think about it in more robust ways, like we've been doing for the last few minutes on the stream, which I really like. Okay, thank you for keeping me up to date on Eleanor's moves. I'll definitely have to try it out at one point or another. But see, I'm a boring and conditioned guy, so it's very easy for me to fall into those traps. Always sad but true. If there's one thing games are great at, well, it's empowering players and telling stories. But if there's a second thing that games are great at, it's conditioning you to be a mindless slave to, well, little cat souls. Boy, that's interesting with the onslaught of malevolence leaching into the area and all of the suspenseful music. I was worried that all of these villagers were going to be like lethargic or brainwashed with malevolence, but they're still just talking about totally banal everyday stuff like the first time we were here. Am I still going the right way? Yeah, I am.
Where are we going? Where's my mom?
Kamoana, your mother is still far away.
Then I need to wait for her.
Yeah, that's true. We did fast jump
Let's go
some
back to
distance.
Berseria.
Scary demons are running through the village. It's too
Who says that,
dangerous there
Grail? Is that
now.
a
I'd
Shulk
like to
quote?
see my mom.
Your mom would be sad if you got hurt by a demon.
It's a relatively
Come with
deep
us,
cut, that.
And we'll keep you safe until she comes back.
Okay, I'll go with you. I wouldn't want Mom to be sad.
Malthus, that also makes sense. I could see them both saying that in different
Alright.
contexts.
You're going to tell me about the demon blight and malevolence.
As I said, deep cut.
Are you seriously thinking of breaking the Moloch taboo?
Aha, there you go.
Depends.
That's why we haven't heard about it yet.
Taboo?
This is about more than just the demons. You could say it's the truth behind how this world really works.
Yes! Give it to me!
Knowledge can be
The
devastating,
truth of your world!
calling into question everything they think they know. And so the Malachim agreed to withhold it from humans, for their own protection.
It's so interesting, Grail, and excuse me, Pottery. It wasn't Grail who said that. Pottery, what you said is so interesting because I could almost write an article just about this, and I might at some point because like I think there is something very cool about taking what is a very standard structure for JRPGs where, you know, there are deep secrets to the nature of the world that aren't immediately revealed, and maybe sometimes characters know about them, sometimes not, but they're oftentimes secrets, and then like making a unique meaning out of that structure in these games that are so concerned with the relationship between desire and will by saying, well, what if it was actually taboo for the characters who knew about these secrets of the world to speak about it for some reason that like binds their will in a certain way that prevents access to this knowledge. So I think that's a really tight way of taking sort of formal considerations of JRPG storytelling and making a thematically resonant story out of it.
Do you still want to know?
It's not like I'm a human anymore.
Damn, she makes a good point.
I can't keep lying to myself. I can't go on unless I know the truth.
Oh, that's a great shot.
You asked for it.
I love Eisen leaning over from the back. He has such posture.
First of all, this thing, this illness you call demon blight does not exist. Any human carries the potential of becoming a demon. All it takes is for the malevolence lurking in their heart to overflow.
And what exactly is this malevolence?
Impure emotions beyond what reason can suppress. Think of it as the sin buried in men's soul.
Okay, so notice, and I'm sure we'll spend the rest of the stream, like the rest of the playthrough of this game, talking about this, so I'll have plenty of time to dwell on it. But we talked a very little bit in Tales of Zestiria about the relationship between emotion and reason, because it does come up in Zestiria, but you could probably count the number of references to it on one hand. Whereas here, I mean, from the very first motions of Tales of Berseria, that's been like the theme with a capital T in the game. But so notice this will be a good moment for us to keep track of and think of as we continue on with the story and as we track what you were saying, Pottery, in terms of thinking about like what role Malevolence is playing in this world versus in Zestiria and what they have to do with each other. Because remember, and not to beat the dead horse, but just to keep it in our mind, like Zestiria cashes out Malevolence in terms of friction between what it is that you believe is the right thing to do or the valuable thing in the world and the actions that you actually undertake. Now we have what is ostensibly, and I don't think we have reason to doubt this at this point, the same concept of Malevolence being cashed out in different terms. We have the notion now of impure emotions beyond what reason can suppress. So that idea of, again, what can probably, and we can try to do some work on this in subsequent streams, be reduced down to the same concept of a friction between what we recognize as valuable or worth doing and what it is that we actually do. But now we have this overlay of, okay, if there are desires on one hand and actions on the other, how does that interact with the notions of emotions? What is it for an emotion to be pure? And what role does reason have on that? Is that a purely deliberative act? Is it an act of actually suppressing or like managing other aspects of ourselves, the emotional aspects, as Magilu seems to be suggesting here? What, if anything, does this have to do with sin? Especially since we know from Zestiria that there seems to be a meaningful conceptual distance between malevolence and morality in terms of what it is to sin or do something that's worth moral approbation on the other hand. So I think this is a good lodestone for grounding our future conversations around this point. It's important.
So you knew.
I'm a witch. So Malevolence is the darkness in all our hearts. Make any sense to you guys? Any at all?
Yeah, I'm thinking the exact same thing about impure being a really interesting choice of word, especially for something like emotions, where you think that, at least I think one of the standing presumptions about emotions is that all emotions are on equal footing, and so there's not really such thing as a pure or impure emotion. Keep in mind that purification, at least in Zestiria, was also the other side of malevolence, right? There's the light and dark in terms of people being taken by malevolence, and then also Hellions being purified and brought back to humanity by the shepherd. So I think that'll be worth it to keep in mind as well. See, if we were just playing Berseria, Grail, I would think maybe Kingdom Hearts when we have a quote like this on the stream, but thankfully, that's why we have the grounding and basis of Zestiria, because I think Magilu is either making it more simplistic for the sake of bringing these guys along and wrapping their heads around it, or maybe she's, if she's not using skillful means, she's being deceitful for her own reasons that might be unclear to us.
When you put it like that, yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
By nature, humans are incited by negative energy. It is easy to turn them towards impurity, creating malevolence. In fact, most people are constantly generating malevolence.
It might even be possible that demons are people's true selves, and what little reason they possess is all that keeps them in human form.
If the masses realize this, the realm would be thrown into utter chaos. That's why the Abbey propagates the lie of demon light.
So I presume.
That can't be true! You know yourselves there weren't any demons before the opening!
It used to be that humans couldn't see demons or Malachim. Not unless they possessed a unique spiritual talent we call resonance.
All your average human would see was someone turning extremely violent. Unable to explain what was happening, they'd just call those people possessed or feral.
Then what made people see them all of a sudden?
I don't know. My guess would be that something triggered greater resonance among all of humanity. And then, on the day of the Advent, all humans gained the ability to perceive Malachim. And in the following days, the exorcist numbers swelled.
This has to be Artorius' doing.
there's no sickness, why would an entire village turn into demons at the same time?
8-headed is the lord of the land, with 7 mouths to devour malevolence.
This is what we were saying.
Humans produce malevolence, which Therions consume and transmit to Anominat. But when we removed Kamawana from the Earth Pulse point...
So it did take them time to work this out.
That's right. With no Therion to absorb their malevolence, the villagers could no longer
You were
contain
right,
it.
Grail. It was just that Magilu and
So
Eisen
you're saying it's all
obviously
my
had an
fault.
antecedent understanding of what the world was like, and so they were immediately able to tell what was going on.
Hey, what's going on? You all look so sad. It's scaring me.
On the other hand, at least now we know we can trust the contents of that ancient book. We tear the Therions away from their Earth Pulse points. Enominat's power will wane, and will prevent this awakening.
But if we take away the Therions, then more and more humans will turn into demons.
It's the only way to kill Artorias.
The heart of it.
The knives come out.
So even the truth won't stop you. Very well.
That's very interesting.
Since each Therion looks different, we'll only find them by capturing the Earth Pulse points one by one.
That idea of Eisen saying not even the truth will stop you. I mean, interesting and ironic, but I think also fitting given this conversation of malevolence and everything that's being unwound in the story now that Velvet, for everything else she's working through, seems, at least in this moment to me, to be like the beacon of purity and resistant to all malevolence, where, as Eisen says, even when the truth is laid bare and it's clear that what a Nominat is and what the awakening even means is unknown, whereas a bunch of humans turning into demons seems demonstrably and evidently bad, Velvet is so aligned between what she believes and what she does that she still just insists, look, my goal is to kill Artorias, so I'm going to do that. I think it's also important keeping in mind, just going back to your earlier comment, Grail, like, and this is something we can think more about as we break down these themes even more, because we have some opportunity to do some rewarding but hardcore philosophy and thinking about epistemology and different kinds of mental states and all that good kind of stuff. But I think there is an important difference between, like, as you say, finding a reason to be a terrible person versus doing the things that you believe in. Like Notice, I think there is a difference between just genuinely believing something and rationalizing something in a post hoc way where you kind of come up for an argument for why something ought to be the case because you want to be able to justify your doing it, even if you don't believe it. And I think at least what I took from Zestiria, and we talked about it at the time, was this idea that people are going to have their beliefs, and sort of a prerequisite for making any progress in society is people being honest about what they believe in and standing up for acting on account of that. And that doesn't entail that all of those actions are going to be good for society, but what it makes possible, if everyone is acting authentically and in that pure way, is then coming in on the level of debate and negotiations, and maybe even sometimes friction of various kinds and conflicts between different states in order to decide which beliefs and governing principles ought to rule people on a societal scale. So it makes possible more productive, like, moral conflicts and social conflicts that actually reach resolution, which is why you might remember we talked about how, like, it's important for the Shepherd Saray to have his arc of purifying the world, which is then followed by Sergei and Alicia going to the negotiations table and figuring out how to make peace between Highland and Rowlands. Like, Saray's work is not equivalent to solving all the moral problems of the world, but makes possible that kind of dialogue that's going to create healthier civilization going forward.
What separates humans and demons?
Yeah, I don't love the voice acting on this Therion either.
That's Eleanor.
Cheer up, Eleanor. Your mommy's looking over you too, you know.
I love the character, though. A very heartwarming addition to the party. And a nice window into what a lot of the characters are wrestling with.
So she is. Thank you. Come, Alana.
Yeah, Laphicet's, I don't know if it's just because I've been exposed to it more, but I don't have as much of a challenge with it.
Malevolence? I told you, the subject is taboo. I understand that human emotions create
Velvet's
a poison
theme,
called
baby.
malevolence that turns people into demons. Is there no way to stop malevolence from being created? As long as humans remain human, no. Malevolence is born of emotion, you see. But your kind must have found a way around it. Malachim experience emotions too. But Malachim do not produce malevolence, unlike humans. That's a lie. I've watched a Malach turn into a demon. That only happens when we are exposed to too much external malevolence. True. The island was full of prisoners and demons. And Melchior hit that Malach with something that turned it into a wyvern. Was it malevolence? To Malachim, malevolence is a powerful toxin. We seek those of purity to serve as vessels to protect us from it. It is not a perfect solution, however. If the vessel is corrupted, the Malach is as well. That is correct. So if Eleanor turns into a demon, then Laphicet... That must be what Eisen meant when he said he'd hate to see Laphicet's vessel.
Yeah, I'm with you, Padre. I think that's a hard job to do well.
Soul is often all it takes to break a person apart. So try not to pick on our squeaky clean exorcist too much, Thanks for the warning.
That is true, and remember, that's one of the things that we still have to straddle in terms of Velvet's approach to Eleanor, because I was calling out her beginning to care more about Eleanor and how she was reflecting on what to do with Oscar beforehand. And it does seem to me like her tone is making her more actively invested in Eleanor as we go along, but there is always still the instrumental concern that she wants to keep Eleanor in good spiritual standing for the sake of Laphicet rather than intrinsically for Eleanor. Also a good point, Grail. Well, friends, this was a jolly way to kick off a week of streaming and game analytic adventures with you. Thank you for bearing with me a little bit past the 3-hour mark, but I think it was definitely worth it for the very cool capstone to that sequence of the story. We got a lot of insight into the history of the world, some of which we already knew, a lot of which was couched in different terms. So I think what I'd encourage us all to do, I'm definitely going to be thinking about this between now and Wednesday, is take some time to reflect on, as we're seeing more of the touch points between this and Zestiria, not just in terms of how it uses the same concepts, but also in terms of how different characters in their different times and contexts interpret those concepts in different ways and situate them in their lives differently. How can we adjudicate that? Like, is there a difference between thinking about things like malevolence in terms of the desire and action distinction, as Zestiria seemed to, and the emotion-reason distinction, as Berseria seems to? Are emotions things that can be pure or impure? And what role does reason or rationality, broadly speaking, have in how we deliberate actions, how we reflect on our own emotions? I think it's an open question in terms of whether this governance relation that several of the characters seem to be pointing to in terms of how reason bears on emotions, if that's actually the right way to think about that relationship, and not even just philosophically in terms of how are those two concepts really related in the real world, but even in terms of these games and the story. I think it's an interesting question to ask. Should we take these characters at face value, that they really are revealing to us the nature of this world, or is the game showing us something that reveals a different reality than the story that they're telling ourselves? And if that's the case, why is it? How can we come to a different understanding of the story and these characters' arcs as we critically interrogate that now, just as we did with Zestiria? And remember, we got a lot out of that, so I think it promises some similarly fruitful efforts. Yeah, cheers, Grail. Well, I'm glad we are more or less catching up with you. Hard to keep track. You might still be a ways ahead of us, but I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about either way. Like I said at the top of the stream, and now it's even more evident, we are really getting into the meat of Act 2 in terms of these characters not just finding their footing with their relationships with each other, but now that they're more established, also coming to understand more about the world and how they intend to chart their course in it, with many more revelations on both fronts between the characters and the world, I'm sure, still to come. I mean, just listen to that music. Speaking of music, it's Velvet's theme. It's still going. I'm sure when we kick off the stream on Wednesday, there'll be plenty more thoughtful, trenchant reflection before we dive back into the next area of grinding and dungeon crawling and boss fighting and all of that other good combat stuff. So thank you so much. Pottery, Grail, such a pleasure to have you both back, as always, my friends. I love our dialogue and conversations. Judark, thank you so much for showing up, my friend. I'm sorry I couldn't contribute in your native tongue of Portuguese, but I hope you got a lot out of this. If you love hanging out, thinking about video game storytelling, and just hanging out with other people who get the magic of the series, this will always be a home for you. If you're someone else who has found this, even if English isn't your first language, even if you're watching the VOD on YouTube, you are always welcome to hang out on Twitch, contribute what you are able to, what you want to. It's always a pleasure to bring more characters into the real-life JRPG party, of whatever backgrounds or walks of life or interest. Yes, I will see you both back here. Sharp, no sleeping through alarms. No, I'm kidding. But 7 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday. Looking forward to more of this. Have more updates, hopefully, on the development of the lecture for PAX West and the piece I'm working on Tales of Destiny and Vesperia, and much more beyond that, I'm sure. Until then, my dear friends, game well, think well. We'll be back on Wednesday. I'm Aaron Suduko, founder of With the Terrible Fate. See you again soon. Cheers.